Hi guys, tonight we step quietly beyond the edge of recorded history, into a world so old that no diary, inscription, or remembered name can guide you. Around you. The night is cool and almost perfectly dark. A small fire breathes softly beside a shelter of branches and hide. Smoke hangs low in the still air, somewhere beyond the glow. Insects pulse in the grass, and a distant animal calls once before the silence closes again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, you can also leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from, and what your local time is. There is something strangely comforting about imagining people in different places, all resting beneath the same night sky. Now, dim the lights, and you begin walking backward, not by years or centuries, but by tens of thousands of years. The familiar world thins around you. Cities disappear, roads fade, farm fields soften into grassland and forest, stone walls sink into the earth, engines, bells, carts, and village noise fall silent. You keep walking until writing itself disappears. There are no dates here. No kings leave victory lists. No merchants scratch accounts into clay. Nobody carves a name above a doorway and expects you to read it. You have entered the overwhelming majority of the human story. Writing, as historians usually define it, appeared only within the last several thousand years, while members of our genus had already been living, travelling, making tools, raising children, and adapting to changing landscapes for an enormously longer span of time. Homo sapiens itself has existed for roughly 300,000 years. Based on fossil evidence currently known to science, almost all of that time lies beyond written testimony, and so you walk into a past that did not know it was prehistoric. That word is ours, not theirs, to the people moving through this landscape. There is nothing unfinished about their world. Morning still arrives with pale light spreading across the hills. Children still wake hungry. Adults still worry about weather, injuries, food, and one another. Someone still dislikes being cold. Someone probably dislikes being told what to do. Human nature, one suspects, didn't politely wait for civilization to begin. You approach a low rise above a river. The water moves quietly over stones, carrying the faint smell of wet earth. Reeds bend near the bank, under your feet. The ground is springy with old leaves and patches of grass. A few people are resting nearby, though you do not know their names and never will. That absence feels strange. In later history, even when records are sparse, you may encounter a name, a queen, a soldier, a farmer listed in a tax register, a child mentioned in a church book. Here, the individual person usually disappears. Archaeology may reveal a hearth, a stone flake, a broken animal bone, or a footprint pressed into ancient mud. Yet the person who made that mark is almost always unreachable. You look toward the fire. One of the people turns a piece of wood in the coals, another adjusts something beside a sleeping place. Their movements are ordinary, practiced, almost boring, and that is exactly the point. Most human life has always been ordinary. The great hidden age of humanity was filled with repeated daily tasks, finding water, repairing tools, watching children, carrying food, cleaning hides, searching for fuel, remembering paths, waiting for daylight. Much of this activity left almost nothing behind. A wooden bowl decays, a woven bag rots, a shelter collapses, footprints vanish beneath rain, spoken stories disappear when the last person who remembers them dies. Even a fire, which might have been the warm center of an evening, can become little more than a darkened patch of soil or a scatter of altered stones. This creates one of the great frustrations of studying early humanity. researchers continue to question how representative the surviving archaeological record really is. Some scholars argue that durable objects such as stone tools dominate our understanding simply because they survive so well. While many parts of daily life were built from wood, fibre, skin, bark, and other materials that usually vanished. It is a little like someone 10,000 years from now reconstructing your whole week from a few ceramic mugs and a metal spoon. They might learn something. They would also miss quite a lot. You move closer to the riverbank where the mud has dried into a thin crust. Here there are tracks. Some belong to animals, others look human. A heel, an arch, the faint spread of toes. Footprints are among the most intimate traces prehistoric people can leave. Unlike a stone tool, which may have been carried or reused, a footprint captures a particular body in a particular moment. At sites such as Litoli in Tanzania, much older hominin footprints were preserved in volcanic ash, offering rare evidence of creatures walking upright millions of years ago. It is a remarkable accident of preservation. Usually, footsteps disappear before sunset. That thought follows you as you watch these imagined people move around their camp. You notice how little they need to erase themselves from history. Nothing dramatic has to happen. There is no great catastrophe required. They simply live. A woman carries something toward the water. A child pokes the ground with a stick, farther away. Someone works stone with controlled strikes. Chips fall into the grass. Those small stone fragments may outlive everything else you see. A quirky truth of archaeology is that sometimes the discarded flakes produced while making a tool can tell researchers as much as the finished tool itself. The waste pieces preserve clues about technique, sequence, skill, and even whether someone was learning. So the rubbish survives, while the conversation does not. There is a gentle irony in that. You sit for a while near the edge of the firelight. The smoke stings your eyes only slightly. The warmth touches one side of your face while the night air cools the other. You hear soft speech, though the words are forever beyond you, and you begin to understand the scale of what has been lost. Not lost in the sense that something went wrong. Lost because time is very good at cleaning up. Generations pass, rivers change course, forests advance and retreat, ice comes and goes, coastlines move, bones weather away, camps are buried, scattered, flooded, or simply trampled into invisibility, yet people continue. That is the quiet contradiction of this hidden age. Almost no individual story survives. And still those forgotten lives carried humanity forward. Every skill learned beside a fire, every remembered spring, every useful plant recognized, every path taught to a child became part of an unrecorded inheritance. You will never know the names of the people beside this river, but as the fire settles into red embers and the darkness grows softer around you, you realize that anonymity does not make their lives empty. It only makes you listen more carefully for the faint traces they left behind. The fire behind you grows smaller as you follow the river into the darkness. At first, the ground seems stable. Stones sit where they have fallen. Roots hold the soil together. The river keeps to its channel, whispering over gravel as though it has been doing exactly this forever. But the landscape is never really still. Over years, centuries, and then thousands of years, almost everything around you begins to move. Rain loosens soil from the slope. Frost splits rock, flood water lifts branches, bones, ash, and broken tools, carrying them downstream. Wind covers one patch of ground while exposing another. Trees fall, roots tear open old surfaces, and burrowing animals disturb layers that once seemed safely buried. You begin to see why the human past can disappear without anyone deliberately destroying it. A campsite may survive for a season, perhaps longer, but survival in the archaeological record requires a strange combination of luck, chemistry, burial, and time. You kneel beside the riverbank, The soil is dark and damp. It smells of clay, leaves, and cold water. Somewhere above you, a branch creaks gently in the wind. Imagine that a group camped here thousands of years ago. They left a cooking fire, a few cracked bones, perhaps a wooden digging stick, scraps of hide, woven fibers, seeds, shells, and tiny flakes of stone. Then the rains came. Some objects floated away, others rotted. Insects consumed organic material. Fungi and bacteria quietly broke down what remained. Animals dragged bones into new places. Later floods rearranged the rest. By the time an archaeologist arrives many millennia afterward, the original camp may have become a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. This is one of the most important facts about prehistoric archaeology. Preservation is uneven. Stone often survives very well. Bone sometimes survives. Wood, skin, basketry, plant fibers, and food remains are far more vulnerable unless conditions are unusually favourable. So the past you reconstruct is not a complete photograph. It is more like a room seen through a doorway that opens for only a second. You walk farther. The river bends toward a low marsh. The air becomes cooler, and the ground softly grips your feet. Wetlands can sometimes preserve materials that would vanish almost anywhere else. Waterlogged conditions may slow decay by limiting oxygen, allowing wood and plant remains to survive for extraordinary lengths of time. At ancient lake margins, bogs, and deeply buried wetlands, archaeologists have recovered wooden tools and other fragile objects that completely change how prehistoric technology appears. That brings you to a curious problem. If you found only stone tools from a society that also relied heavily on wood, you might imagine stone dominated everyday life. But perhaps stone was only the part that refused to disappear. Some researchers describe this as preservation bias. Scholars remain divided on exactly how much missing organic technology would alter our picture of different prehistoric communities. But nearly everyone working with ancient material understands that absence does not always mean something was never there. That sounds simple. In practice, it changes everything. You continue into a stand of trees. The forest floor feels soft beneath you, layered with generations of leaves. The smell of damp bark fills the air. Here, acidic soil can be especially destructive to bone. Bone may seem solid, but it is chemically vulnerable in some environments. Groundwater and acidic conditions gradually dissolve its mineral structure until very little remains. You might stand directly above an ancient burial or hunting site and find almost no bone at all. Warm climates can make preservation even harder. Heat and moisture encourage biological activity. Microorganisms thrive. Organic materials break down quickly. Tropical environments, despite supporting rich human life for immense periods, can therefore leave frustratingly thin archaeological traces. You leave the trees and climb a low ridge, far below. You can imagine a broad plain extending beyond the present shore. Sea level has changed dramatically over human history, particularly during glacial periods, when large quantities of water were locked in ice sheets. Coastlines lay much farther out than they do today. People lived, travelled, gathered food, and camped across landscapes that are now submerged. When the ice melted and sea levels rose, many of those places disappeared beneath the water. Researchers continue to question how much prehistoric coastal archaeology now lies beneath modern seas, particularly because shorelines offered food and useful travel routes. You stand there imagining camps that shifted with seasons and paths now crossed by fish. The sea does not know it is hiding history, nor does the river know when it carries away a hearth. Nature is not preserving or destroying with intention, it is simply changing. You descend from the ridge and notice another small trick of survival. A shell lies half buried in pale soil. Shell middens, ancient accumulations of discarded shells and other food debris can preserve remarkable evidence of meals and local environments. In some cases, the calcium carbonate in shells can reduce surrounding soil acidity, helping fragile material survive. So occasionally, prehistoric rubbish becomes a tiny preservation shelter. Humanity is fortunate that people have always produced leftovers. You smile at the thought and keep walking. Ahead, a small stream cuts into the earth, revealing stripes of sediment. Each layer represents a different moment. Sand from one flood, silt from another, ash from a fire, soil formed during a quiet period. Archaeologists read these layers carefully because context matters as much as the object itself. A stone tool found in its original layer can be far more informative than the same tool washed loose onto a riverbank. Its position may connect it to a hearth, an animal bone, a climate event, or another activity. But landscapes mix things. Floods move artifacts. Animals dig tunnels. Tree roots pull objects upward and downward. Freeze and thaw cycles shift soil. Even when evidence survives, it may no longer be where humans left it. You begin to understand that archaeology is partly the study of ancient people and partly the study of everything that happened to their belongings afterward. The second story can last far longer than the first. A tool might be used for a few months, then it may spend 20,000 years being buried. You pause beside the exposed bank. The evening air has cooled. Water drips softly from roots above the stream. A few grains of earth crumble downward and vanish into the current. And suddenly the hidden age feels even larger. You're not simply missing people because they failed to write. You are missing them because forests breathed over their camps. Rivers rearranged their belongings. Oceans covered their shores, and chemistry patiently dissolved what they left behind. The mystery is not that so little survived. The stranger thing is that anything survived at all. You reach down and touch a stone resting in the sediment. It is cool, smooth, and silent. Perhaps that is why stone becomes such a faithful companion in the journey ahead. While almost everything softer returns to the earth, stone waits, and as the river murmurs beside you, you follow those stubborn fragments onward. The stone in your hand feels heavier now, not because it has changed, but because you have begun to understand what it represents. Around you, the landscape stretches quietly beneath a pale morning sky. The river from the night before has widened into a shallow valley, and beyond it low hills rise beneath scattered trees. The air is cool enough that you can see a faint mist hovering above the water, somewhere in the grass. A bird gives a short call, then falls silent again. Long before villages, farms, roads, or permanent houses, early humans lived in small mobile groups that moved through landscapes according to food, water, weather, and season. They didn't wander without purpose. They knew places. They remembered where animals crossed rivers, where edible plants appeared after rain, where stones suitable for tools could be found, and where shelter might be available when the wind changed. Their maps were carried in memory. And as you walk deeper into this world, you begin searching for people who rarely left anything obvious behind. At first, you see nothing. No walls, no roofs, no paths worn into permanent roads. The ground looks empty. Then you notice a few stones clustered near a patch of darker soil. One has a sharp edge. Another carries the small scars left by repeated blows. A third is simply a flake, thin enough to fit between two fingers. To an untrained eye, these objects might look like ordinary rocks. To an archaeologist, they may be evidence that someone once sat here and worked. Stone tool making is one of the most durable signatures left by early humans. Some of the oldest known stone technologies date back millions of years, far earlier than our own species. The simple act of striking one stone against another could produce an edge sharp enough to cut meat, scrape hide, process plants, or shape wood. You imagine someone sitting on the ground in this very place. Their legs are folded beneath them. Their hands move carefully. One stone rests in the palm, another strikes its edge. Tap, pause, turn, tap again. A small flake falls into the dust. The sound is surprisingly delicate. You might expect prehistoric toolmaking to sound rough and chaotic, but skilled knapping can be controlled and precise. The toolmaker understands how stone fractures. They know where to strike and how much force to use. A poor blow wastes material. A good one creates exactly the edge needed. You crouch nearby and watch. The morning sun touches the stone, revealing tiny ripples along the newly broken surface. One of the more curious facts about stone tools is that archaeologists can sometimes reconstruct the sequence of their manufacture by fitting discarded flakes back together. Rather like rebuilding a very old three-dimensional puzzle, the original tool may be gone. The waste can still remember how it was made. That is the kind of small miracle prehistoric archaeology depends upon. You move on. The camp itself is almost invisible. A few burned stones lie near the centre. There are traces of charcoal. Some animal bones have been broken, perhaps for marrow. A handful of flakes are scattered nearby. Everything else has vanished. No baskets remain. No sleeping mats. No wooden containers. No clothing. No spoken instructions. And yet you know people were here. You begin imagining the group as evening settles over the valley. Perhaps there are 20 people, perhaps fewer. The exact size of prehistoric mobile groups is difficult to determine, and researchers continue to question how closely ethnographic examples from recent hunter-gatherer societies can be applied to populations living tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. Still, small groups would have offered practical advantages. They could move more easily. They could share food. They could watch children. They could cooperate when gathering resources or dealing with danger. Large permanent settlements would have been difficult to support in many environments before food production became common, so life moved. One camp lasted days, another perhaps weeks, then the group left. You follow them. The path does not look like a path. You move through tall grass, across gravel, between trees. Someone ahead carries a bundle. Another person holds a child. A few tools are tucked into hide or fibre wrappings that will never survive long enough for you to find them. The pace is steady rather than hurried. Travel itself is part of ordinary life. You notice how different this feels from modern movement. Today, distance is often measured in minutes by car or hours by plane. Here, distance is measured through the body. A hill means effort. A river means choosing a crossing. A dry valley means thinking about water before entering it. The landscape is not scenery. It is infrastructure. Every familiar landmark matters. You reach a shallow overhang in the rock. The group stops. There is shade here, and protection from part of the wind. Old ash already darkens the ground. This place has been used before, perhaps by the same people, perhaps by their parents, perhaps by strangers. Repeated occupation is important because many prehistoric sites were not permanent homes. They were places people returned to when conditions were useful. A rock shelter near water might be occupied again and again for generations. Layer upon layer of ash, bone, stone, and sediment could slowly build. For archaeologists, such places are valuable because repeated activity leaves more evidence than a single night's camp, but they can also be confusing. Imagine several families using the same patch of ground across 5,000 years. Objects from different visits may become mixed. A hearth might sit above an older hearth. A stone tool could be moved by later occupants. The site becomes less like a frozen moment and more like a notebook written over many times. Scholars remain divided on how confidently particular artifacts can sometimes be linked to very specific behaviours when sites have experienced repeated disturbance. The caution is important. A broken bone does not explain itself. A sharp stone does not announce who used it. You have to resist giving every object a dramatic story. Most of the time, the truth was probably quieter. Someone needed to cut something. Someone repaired a tool. Someone ate. Someone slept. Someone became bored. Someone told a story while another person worked. You look around the shelter. The fire gives off a low crackle. Smoke rises along the stone ceiling and drifts outward. The smell of cooked food mixes with damp earth and old ash. A child turns a pebble over in both hands. An older person sits close to the warmth. You cannot know their names. You cannot know what language they speak. You may never know exactly how they are related, but the scene feels less empty than it did before. The evidence is small because the lives themselves were made from thousands of small actions. One footprint, one flake, one hearth, one broken bone, one place revisited after many seasons. That is how nearly invisible ancestors begin to appear, not all at once, not as complete portraits, only as brief outlines formed from fragments. Night returns slowly outside the shelter. The valley becomes blue, then grey, then almost black. The last light catches the edge of a stone lying beside the fire. Tomorrow, someone may pick it up, or perhaps it will remain there for 20,000 years. You listen to the quiet breathing of the people around you and realize that this hidden world was never truly silent. It only became silent later. And with that thought, you continue following the traces they left behind. Outside the shelter, morning arrives slowly. The fire has collapsed into pale ash, and first light gathers along the ridge beyond the valley. Moisture beads on the grass. The air has that sharp early chill that makes your fingers feel stiff before the sun warms the ground. Around you, people begin to move. There's no bell announcing the day. No road waits beyond the camp. You simply gather what can be carried. A stone tool disappears into a wrapping. A bundle of dried food is tied closed. A child is lifted against a shoulder. Someone checks the remaining embers. Then the group begins walking, for much of human prehistory. Mobility was not an occasional adventure. It was part of ordinary life. People moved because resources moved. Animals migrated. Plants ripened at different times. Waterholes filled and dried. To live well in such a world, you needed knowledge of more than one place. You needed an entire landscape held in memory. As you follow the group, you begin to understand what that means. A modern map flattens the world into lines and symbols. Here, the map is something you feel. The river bend means fish. A line of darker trees suggests water. A distant ridge marks the direction of a stone source. A patch of flowering plants tells you something about season. Even the wind carries information. It smells of damp soil, smoke, animals, or approaching rain. The people around you notice these things almost without speaking. Someone walked this valley as a child. Someone else remembers a spring beyond the hill. Another person knows which crossing becomes dangerous after heavy rain. This is one mainstream truth about hunter-gatherer life that archaeologists and anthropologists emphasize again and again. Mobility was often structured rather than random. Groups frequently return to familiar places according to season, weather, food availability, and social ties. You're not wandering. You're moving through a known world. By midday, the valley opens into a broad plain. The sun warms the back of your neck. Dry grass brushes your legs. Insects flicker above low plants. And somewhere far off you hear grazing animals. The distance looks enormous. There are no fences to divide it. No signs telling you that the next water source is 12 kilometers away. You simply walk, at first. The pace seems gentle. Then the hours accumulate. Your feet feel the ground through whatever simple covering you imagine wearing. Perhaps hide, perhaps nothing at all. Depending on place and period, small stones matter, mud matters, a steep slope matters. The human body becomes your vehicle, your clock, and your measure of distance. And you might wonder how far people could travel this way. The answer varied enormously. Age, terrain, climate, food, children, illness, and purpose all mattered. Researchers continue to debate how far particular prehistoric groups ranged across their territories, especially when the only clues come from stone sources, animal remains, and scattered camps. Sometimes stone itself offers a quiet surprise. Archaeologists have found tools or raw materials made from rock that originated many tens or even hundreds of kilometers from where those objects were discarded. That does not always mean one person walked the entire distance. The material may have moved through exchange, gifts, meetings, or several stages of travel. Still, it reveals connection stretching far beyond a single campsite. A stone can have a geography. You pick up a dark piece of flint and imagine its journey. Perhaps it began as a larger block near a distant cliff. Someone struck flakes from it. One flake became a tool. The tool travelled in a pouch. It was sharpened repeatedly. Later, it was passed to someone else. Finally, it broke and was left beside a river. Thousands of years later, an archaeologist traces the stone back toward its source. A discarded object becomes a faint line across the landscape. You continue until the plain gives way to scattered trees. The shade is welcome. The temperature drops slightly beneath the branches. The smell changes from dry grass to bark and leaf litter. The group slows near a shallow depression. There is water. Not much, but enough. Water shapes movement more powerfully than almost anything else. A permanent river can anchor repeated visits. A seasonal pool may matter only briefly, in dry regions. Knowing where water remains through difficult months can make all the difference. One person kneels and drinks. Another fills a simple container. Perhaps it is made from animal skin, bark, shell, or plant material that will vanish completely from the archaeological record. That missing container reminds you again how deceptive survival can be if the vessel decays. Future researchers may see only stone tools nearby and wonder how people transported water at all. Prehistory is full of invisible solutions. After resting, the group turns toward higher ground. By late afternoon, you reach a place where several paths seem to meet. There are no carved signs, but the area feels used. Old hearthstones lie beneath grass. Broken shells appear in the soil. A few stone flakes glitter when the sun catches them. Perhaps people gather here at certain times of year. Seasonal gatherings may have allowed smaller groups to meet, exchange information, find partners, share food, maintain alliances, and perform ceremonies. Scholars remain divided on how common or formally organized such gatherings were in different prehistoric societies, because social events rarely fossilize neatly. Still, concentrations of artifacts can sometimes hint that more than one small group was present. You imagine the quiet excitement of arrival. People recognize familiar faces. Children meet relatives they have not seen for months. News travels. Someone has found a new stone source. Someone else knows where animals are gathering. There may be laughter, teasing, arguments, and long conversations after dark. None of it leaves a clear archaeological label. Yet these meetings may have been as important as food. Humans did not travel only through ecology. They traveled through relationships. And here is a quieter, lesser-known possibility hidden inside long journeys. Sometimes the reason to walk for days may simply have been another person, not a resource, not a tool, a person. By evening, Fires begin to appear across the gathering place. Their light flickers between bodies and to trees. Smoke rises into cool air. Your legs ache now, and you understand movement differently than you did this morning. The landscape is no longer empty space between camps. It is the structure of life itself. Every hill holds memory. Every water source has a season. Every familiar shelter is part of a mental map carried from generation to generation. There are no roads beneath your feet, but there are routes, no written schedules. But there are rhythms, no border signs. But there are places known, shared, avoided, remembered, and returned to. You sit beside one of the fires, someone adds a branch, and sparks drift upward, beyond the circle of light. The dark land stretches in every direction. Tomorrow, people will walk into it again, and because almost every journey leaves so little behind, the miles themselves will disappear. Only a few stones, distant materials, and scattered camps will remain to suggest how large their world truly was. The gathering place grows quiet long before the sky begins to pale. Around you, the fires shrink one by one. Voices fade into murmurs, somewhere nearby. A child shifts beneath a covering of hide, and from the darkness beyond the camp comes the soft rustle of something moving through dry grass. You lie awake for a moment, listening. The ground beneath you is not comfortable by modern standards. There is no mattress, no carefully level floor, no pillow waiting at the end of the day. Instead, there may be a layer of grasses, leaves, reeds, or animal skins placed between your body and the cold earth. It is simple, but simple does not mean careless. People living in the temporary camps knew how to make a place more livable with whatever the surrounding landscape provided. Branches could become frames, hides could block wind, grass could soften sleeping areas. A fire could transform a bare patch of ground into the centre of a temporary home. And temporary is the important word. By tomorrow, much of this camp may already be disappearing. Morning arrives quietly. You wake to a faint grey light and the smell of old smoke. The fire is almost out. A few orange points remain deep beneath the ash, glowing when the wind passes over them. Around you, people are already preparing to leave. No one begins dismantling a house because there is no house in the modern sense. Instead, useful materials are gathered. A hide covering is folded, cordage is untied, a wooden pole is lifted from the ground, a basket is checked for anything worth carrying. Nothing is wasted if it can still serve a purpose. This is a practical reality of mobile life. For many prehistoric communities, possessions had to be portable. A heavy object might be useful at a permanent village, but when every journey depends on human bodies carrying food, tools, children, and supplies, weight matters very quickly. You discover this the moment someone hands you a bundle. It is not enormous. It is simply heavier than it looked, after only a short distance. You understand why people might prefer objects that were light, repairable, and easy to replace. A wooden container weighs less than a stone one. A woven basket can carry food and then be repaired. A hide can become clothing, bedding, shelter, or wrapping. The trouble for archaeology is that all of these materials tend to decay. The camp you are standing in may therefore have been filled with objects that future researchers will never see. This is one of the central facts of prehistoric preservation. Organic materials usually survive only under exceptional conditions. Wood rots, plant fibers break down, leather disappears. Food decomposes. If archaeologists later excavate this place, they may recover stone tools and perhaps some burned bone while missing most of the equipment that actually surrounded you. You watch someone roll a sleeping mat. It is made from reeds woven together with practiced hands. The texture is rough but flexible. It smells faintly of dry plants and smoke. Within a few years, if abandoned, it would probably be gone. That tiny act of decay changes history. Imagine an entire camp made largely from materials like this. Now imagine nearly all of it vanishing. What remains can make prehistoric life appear emptier and cruder than it really was. Researchers continue to question how sophisticated many early organic technologies may have been, because the evidence survives so unevenly. Some archaeologists argue that complex weaving, basket making, woodworking, and cord production were probably far more common than the surviving record suggests. Others caution that we should not reconstruct technologies too confidently without direct evidence. The disagreement is gentle, but important. You can infer, you can compare, you can experiment, but you cannot simply invent. You leave the sleeping area and walk toward the center of camp. Here, the ground preserves more obvious activity: ash, charcoal, darkened stones, fragments of bone, a few cracked shells, small flakes left from tool-making. This is the material that has the best chance of remaining after everyone leaves. Even then, survival is uncertain. Rain may scatter the ash, animals may move the bones, wind may cover the hearth, roots may grow through everything. In a few generations, the place could become almost impossible to recognize. And yet, for one night, this was home. That thought follows you as breakfast is prepared. There is little ceremony. Perhaps some leftover meat is warmed near the coals. Perhaps roots collected the previous day are shared. Perhaps someone eats dried berries from a small container. Food is one of the most intimate parts of everyday life, and also one of the easiest to lose. Most meals leave no grand monument. They leave scraps, burned seeds, tiny bones, shells, starch grains, sometimes. Microscopic residues cling to tools or become trapped in hardened deposits. A quirky archaeological detail is that ancient dental calculus, the hardened plaque preserved on teeth, can sometimes hold microscopic traces of foods, plant material, and other particles, so occasionally a forgotten meal survives not in a cooking pot, but on a tooth. It is hardly glamorous, but prehistory does not always preserve what seems dignified. You imagine how amused the people around you might be if they knew that thousands of years later. Scholars could study their breakfast through something they never managed to clean from their teeth. A little prehistoric embarrassment. Safely delayed. You move toward the edge of the camp. Here, several wooden tools rest against a tree. One is a long digging stick, another may be a spear shaft. They are smooth from handling. The wood carries small marks from shaping and repair. These tools may have been used every day. A stone blade might only be part of the technology. Wood provided handles, shafts, clubs, containers, supports, frames, digging tools, and countless other objects. But unless such items fall into waterlogged ground, dry caves, frozen conditions, or another protective environment, they usually vanish. You pick up the digging stick. It feels warm where the morning sun touches it. The tool is elegant in its simplicity. No metal, no decoration. Just carefully chosen wood shaped for a task. A few hours later, the group is ready. You look back. The place already seems different, without bodies moving through it. The camp feels smaller. A circle of stones, flattened grass, ash, a few scraps nobody considered worth carrying. The shelters have been dismantled or abandoned. The bedding has gone. The baskets have gone. The wooden tools have gone. Even the smell of smoke begins to thin. You walk away with everyone else. After 100 steps, the camp is partly hidden by trees. After another 100, it disappears completely. Now imagine rain arriving tonight. Water strikes the ash and presses it into the soil. The grass begins to rise. Leaves fall. Insects return. A fox crosses the empty space and disturbs a bone. By next season, Another traveller might pass nearby without realising anyone had ever slept there. That is how a human place can vanish. Not through disaster. Not through abandonment after some great tragedy, simply because it was designed to last for a night, a week, or a season. You continue walking as the sun rises higher behind you. The campsite slowly returns to the landscape. The people carry their world with them, and the earth quietly closes over almost everything they leave behind. The path narrows as you leave the fading campsite behind. By late morning, the ground has changed. The soft soil gives way to exposed stone, pale beneath the sun. Low hills rise ahead, their surfaces broken into ledges and scattered fragments. The air is warmer here, and every step sends a faint crunch through loose gravel. The people around you slow down. They are looking for something. Not food, not water, stone. You begin to notice that not every rock is equally useful. Some fracture unpredictably, crumbling when struck. Others split into sharp flakes with smooth, curved surfaces. Flint, chert, obsidian, quartzite. And other stones were valued in different regions because they could be shaped into cutting edges, points, scrapers, and other tools. The choice of material mattered. A poor piece of stone could waste time. A good piece might become several useful tools. You watch someone kneel beside an exposed seam of dark rock. They strike it once with another stone. A clear sound rings out. The fragment that breaks free is examined, turned in the hand, then carried away. This simple act belongs to one of the longest technological traditions in human history. Stone tools appear in the archaeological record millions of years before writing, agriculture, or cities. For huge stretches of time, they're among the most reliable objects we have for tracing what early humans were doing. That durability creates an odd imbalance. Imagine the camp you left this morning. The baskets disappeared, the hide coverings vanished, the wooden poles rotted, but the stone flakes remain. Thousands of generations later, those flakes may become the loudest surviving voice of the entire community. You continue toward a flat area where several people sit working. The process is calm and deliberate. A core of stone rests in one person's hand. With each controlled strike, a flake separates, tap, turn, examine, tap again. The rhythm is almost soothing. You can hear tiny pieces landing on the ground. Modern eyes may see a primitive activity, but the skill involved can be considerable. Stone does not forgive carelessness. The toolmaker needs to understand angles, force, grain, and the structure of the material with experience. The shape hidden inside a rough stone can be planned before it exists. Archaeological experiments have shown that reproducing certain prehistoric tools requires practice and careful control. A hand axe, for example, may look simple in a museum case. Try making one yourself, and the confidence disappears quickly. You might discover that ancient technology has a rather effective way of insulting modern self-esteem. Beside you, another person lifts a finished tool. Its edge is thin, its surface carries overlapping scars from repeated flake removal. Perhaps it will be used to butcher an animal. Perhaps it will cut plants. Perhaps it will shape wood, which means the stone tool is only one part of a larger technology that will not survive. That possibility matters when archaeologists recover stone. They often have to infer what the stone was helping people do. Microscopic wear can sometimes provide clues. Tiny polish, fractures, scratches, or residues along an edge may reveal whether a tool contacted hide, wood, meat, or plant material. Even after the handle, basket, spear shaft, or clothing has disappeared, the stone may preserve traces of those vanished materials. A tool becomes a witness to things that are no longer present. You pick up a flake that has fallen near your feet. It is surprisingly sharp. The edge catches the light. You run a finger close to it without pressing down. Freshly broken stone can produce an edge fine enough for delicate cutting. Some experimental researchers have even compared freshly fractured obsidian edges with modern surgical sharpness. Though naturally no one in this camp is opening a prehistoric medical clinic, the point is simpler. Old technology was not necessarily dull technology. What looks rough from a distance can become remarkably precise in the hand. You follow one toolmaker as they choose another piece of raw material. This stone has come from far away. Because its colour and composition are different from the local rock. Archaeologists often identify the geological source of stone by studying its mineral or chemical signature. When material appears far from its origin, it can reveal movement, exchange, or contact between groups. A small piece of obsidian might have travelled across landscapes that would take days or weeks to cross on foot. That does not mean the same person carried it the entire distance. It may have changed hands several times. Perhaps it was gifted, perhaps traded, perhaps carried between relatives. The stone cannot tell you which explanation is correct. This is where the certainty begins to soften. Researchers continue to disagree over how much long-distance stone movement reflects direct travel and how much resulted from exchange networks. The same object can fit several stories. A distant source might mean mobility, or social connection, or both. You sit beside the workers and listen to the steady tapping. There is another complication. Stone tools change through time. A tool may begin large, then become smaller after repeated sharpening. Edges are repaired, broken pieces are reused. A flake that looks insignificant might itself become a cutting implement. Nothing requires the neat categories found in modern display cases. Real objects have biographies. They are made, carried, modified, damaged, reused, and finally discarded. Sometimes a tool is abandoned because it breaks. Sometimes because it becomes too small. Sometimes perhaps because the group is moving and there is better stone ahead. You imagine an archaeologist discovering it thousands of years later. The object sits beneath a label, type, date, material, location, useful information. Certainly. But the label cannot tell you whether the person who made it was tired. It cannot tell you whether someone watched and learned. It cannot tell you whether the toolmaker was respected, impatient, joking, or quietly annoyed at a bad piece of rock. Stone preserves technique far better than personality. Still, occasionally it offers something unexpectedly human at some prehistoric sites. Archaeologists have found concentrations of poor quality flakes and mistakes near more skillfully worked material. One interpretation is that learners may have practiced beside experienced knappers. You can imagine the scene easily. A younger person strikes too hard. The stone snaps badly. Someone older takes it, turns it once, and shows them again. No written lesson survives, only the mistake. That small pile of failed flakes may preserve an ancient classroom. The thought makes the stone field around you feel less mechanical. These objects were not produced by anonymous hands. They were produced by people teaching, watching, correcting, and repeating. As afternoon light begins to soften, the group gathers what is worth carrying. Some finished tools disappear into bags. Useful flakes are selected. The heavier waste remains behind. Within minutes, the working area begins to look abandoned. Yet this place will survive better than the camp. The people leave almost nothing soft here. Instead, hundreds of stone fragments lie scattered across the ground. Rain may move them slightly. Soil may cover them. Plants may grow above them. But many will remain. Long after the voices vanish. Long after the wooden handles rot. Long after the people themselves become unreachable. These stones will still carry the shape of intention. You stand and look across the silent scatter. The hidden age of humanity may have lost nearly all its words, but stone remembers the pressure of a hand. It remembers a strike, a choice, a mistake, a skill practiced until it became effortless. And as you follow the group away from the quarry, the tapping continues in your memory, quiet and regular, like a language written without letters. By the time the stone working place has disappeared behind the ridge, the light has begun to soften. The sun sits low over the landscape, spreading a dull gold across the grass. Shadows lengthen beneath scattered trees. The warmth of the afternoon slips away almost without warning, and soon you can feel cool air settling against your skin. Ahead, someone stops. A few dry branches are gathered. Another person kneels. Within minutes, a small fire begins to glow. At first there is only smoke. Then a thin tongue of flame catches the edge of a twig. Another follows. The light strengthens, and the group gathers closer. You sit down as well. The change is immediate. Cold retreats from your hands. The darkness beyond the camp becomes less complete. Faces appear and disappear in the shifting light. Smoke rises slowly, carrying the smell of dry wood and scorched grass. For early humans, controlled fire was one of the most transformative technologies ever used. Evidence for ancient fire use stretches far back into the human past, although the exact timing of when different human groups began controlling it regularly remains uncertain. At some archaeological sites, burned bone, heated stone, ash, and reddened sediment suggest repeated fires. At others, the evidence is much more difficult to interpret. Fire leaves traces, but fire can also be produced naturally. Wildfires move through landscapes, lightning strikes trees, heat alters soil, so when researchers discover ancient burned material, they must ask a careful question. Was someone sitting beside this fire, or did nature make it? There is still disagreement among specialists about how early habitual fire use began. Some researchers place reliable evidence hundreds of thousands of years into the past, while others argue that occasional fire use may have started considerably earlier. The uncertainty does not make fire less important. If anything, it makes the story more interesting. You hold your hands toward the flames. Heat reaches your palms while your back remains cold. Someone places a piece of food near the coals. Cooking changes more than flavor. Heat can soften tough foods. Make some nutrients easier to obtain, reduce certain pathogens, and broaden the range of things that can be eaten safely. The relationship between cooking and human evolution has inspired major debate. Some scholars have argued that cooked food played an important role in supporting larger brains and changing human digestion. Others think the timing is too uncertain to connect these developments so neatly. The fire does not settle the argument, it simply crackles. You watch fat drip onto a hot stone. A brief hiss rises. Smoke changes smell. Suddenly the entire camp feels warmer, not only in temperature but in mood. Fire creates a center. People sit around it. Tools can be repaired beside it. Food can be shared beside it. Children can remain within its light. Predators may be less willing to approach. And once darkness falls, the day does not have to end immediately. That final point may have mattered more than it first appears. Without artificial light, night changes human behavior. You cannot simply switch on a lamp. The darkness beyond the fire is deep. You can hear movement in it, but you cannot always see what caused the sound. A flame creates a small island of visibility. People remain awake together inside that island. You imagine conversation continuing. Perhaps stories are told, perhaps plans are made, perhaps someone teaches a child the names of animals or places. Perhaps someone simply complains about another person snoring. Human beings have probably found ways to be mildly irritated around campfires for a very long time. The thought feels reassuringly familiar. A less obvious detail comes from the way fire can preserve evidence while also destroying it. Burned food may become carbonized rather than decomposing completely. Charred seeds can survive for astonishing length of time. Tiny fragments of charcoal can reveal what kinds of wood people gathered. Heat can even alter stone in ways that archaeologists can recognize. So the same flames that consumed part of a meal may help that meal survive into the future. You look at a blackened seed near the edge of the hearth. It is almost nothing, yet if buried quickly, it might outlast every voice around you. The fire also changes the materials people can work with. Wooden spear tips can be hardened carefully near heat. Adhesives used for hafting tools may require controlled warming. Some stones fracture differently after heating. Later, prehistoric communities would use fire in increasingly specialized ways, eventually transforming clay, minerals, and metals. But here, long before furnaces or pottery workshops, the basic principle is already powerful. Heat changes things. You notice a person turning a wooden shaft above the coals, not burning it, watching it, rotating it. The process demands patience. Too much heat ruins the wood. Too little achieves nothing, like stone napping. Fire use rewards experience. Knowledge is carried through observation. Younger members of the group do not need written instructions. They watch, they imitate, they make mistakes. Someone corrects them. This is how technology can persist for generations without a single diagram. The night deepens. Beyond the firelight, the landscape has disappeared. Only sound remains. A distant call, grass moving in the wind, the occasional crack of a branch somewhere outside the circle. The flames shorten. Someone places another log across the coals. Sparks climb into the dark. You begin to understand why fire may have changed social time itself. During daylight, many hours are consumed by movement, gathering, hunting, tool-making, and other practical tasks. Night creates a slower space. Bodies rest. Hands become less busy. Attention turns inward toward the group. Researchers have explored whether evening firelight encouraged storytelling and social bonding, partly by comparing patterns observed among some recent hunter-gatherer communities. The idea is intriguing. Though direct evidence from deep prehistory is almost impossible to recover, words leave no ash, stories leave no cut marks. Yet the setting feels persuasive. You sit beneath a sky crowded with stars. There is no electric glow on the horizon, no distant city, no aircraft. The darkness is complete enough that the stars seem almost layered. Someone beside you speaks. You cannot understand the language, but you hear changes in rhythm. Another person responds. A few quiet laughs follow. Perhaps nothing important is being said. That matters too. Not every ancient conversation needed to carry sacred knowledge. People could simply talk. The fire settles lower. Its brightest flames vanish, leaving red coals beneath grey ash. Heat still radiates from them. You pull closer. Tomorrow, archaeologists might find this hearth as a patch of burned sediment. They might measure the charcoal. They might identify fragments of bone. They might date the remains. They might argue about whether this was a brief stop or a repeatedly used camp. What they will not recover is the feeling of sitting here. The smoke in your hair, the warmth against your knees, the changing expressions on familiar faces, the quiet relief of darkness held back for one more hour. And perhaps that is why the hearth feels so intimate. Stone remembers hands, but fire seems to remember company. You watch the last ember pulse softly in the ash. Around you, voices fade, the night grows colder, and inside this small circle of warmth, human life becomes just a little easier to imagine. The embers are still warm when morning reaches the camp. At first, You notice only small movements. Someone shifts beneath a hide covering. A child sits up and rubs sleep from their eyes. An older person reaches toward the ash, searching for a coal that can be coaxed back into flame. The camp wakes slowly. No one announces who belongs to whom. There are no family names, written records, or portraits arranged on a wall, and yet relationships are everywhere. A hand steadies a child stepping over a stone. Someone shares food before eating. A younger adult carries a bundle that an older person might once have carried alone. You begin to realize that one of the hardest parts of prehistoric life to reconstruct is also one of the most important. Who cared for whom? Who raised children? Who remained together for years? Who joined the group through partnership, kinship, friendship, or necessity? Archaeology can sometimes reveal bodies, tools, food, injuries, and movement. Affection is much harder. You watch a child sitting near the fire. They are turning a small piece of stone in both hands, copying an adult nearby. The imitation is clumsy. The child strikes once. Nothing happens. They try again. This simple scene reflects something fundamental about human survival. Children require long periods of care compared with many other animals. Human childhood is unusually extended. Young people need years to learn skills, social rules, places, foods, dangers, and the habits of the group. That makes caregiving central to human life. It also means that raising a child was unlikely to have been the work of only one person. Anthropologists often use the idea of cooperative care to describe systems in which parents, grandparents, siblings, and other members of a community contribute to raising children. How far back such arrangements extend is still discussed. Some researchers see deep evolutionary roots in shared childcare. Others warn that family patterns probably varied widely across times and places. The disagreement remains open because prehistoric kinship does not leave a tidy outline in the soil. You look around the camp. Perhaps the person helping the child is a parent, perhaps an older sibling, perhaps an aunt, uncle, grandparent, or unrelated companion. You cannot know from the scene alone. Ancient DNA sometimes provides another clue. When genetic material survives, researchers may be able to identify biological relationships among individuals buried at the same site. Parents and children, siblings, more distant relatives. But biology is not the same as family. A person can be cared for by someone unrelated by blood. A child can belong socially to people who share no close genetic connection. So even DNA gives you only part of the story. You walk toward an older person sitting near the edge of camp. Their movements are slow. One leg seems stiff, perhaps an injury healed badly years ago. They are not ignored. Someone brings them food. Another person places a tool within reach. This, too, can leave evidence. Prehistoric skeletons sometimes preserve injuries or illnesses that healed long before death. A healed fracture tells you that a person survived after being hurt. In some cases, the injury may have been severe enough that survival probably required assistance. It is tempting to see such remains as direct proof of compassion. Sometimes that interpretation may be reasonable. Still, specialists debate how confidently care can be reconstructed from skeletal evidence alone. A healed injury tells you someone survived. It does not record every hand that helped. Even so, the possibility changes the atmosphere around you. Early human life is sometimes imagined as relentlessly harsh, with everyone surviving only through personal strength. But cooperation is also ancient. Sharing food, watching children, helping injured companions, and teaching skills can make a group more resilient. You may survive because someone else remembers the path. Someone else may survive because you carry part of their load. It is practical survival, nearby. Two adults are examining a bundle of gathered plants. They talk quietly. One separates useful stems from damaged ones, the other ties them together. Their familiarity suggests repeated work. You find yourself wondering whether they are partners. Perhaps they have shared a sleeping place for years. Perhaps they are siblings. Perhaps neither. Partnership rarely fossilizes. A pair buried together does not automatically mean a married couple. Ideas such as marriage and descent can differ dramatically between societies. One revealing detail comes from teeth. Before ancient DNA became widely available, researchers sometimes examined inherited dental traits, such as the shapes of certain teeth. To estimate possible biological relationships within burial groups, teeth can preserve well when other parts of a skeleton deteriorate. A tiny feature on a molar may therefore hint that two people shared ancestry. It is a strangely modest place for family history to hide, not in a surname, not in a family tree, in the shape of a tooth. You continue walking through the camp. Children move between adults without hesitation. An infant is passed from one pair of arms to another. Someone laughs softly when a toddler drops a piece of food into the dirt. The food is picked up and returned. Apparently the 5-second rule has a very ancient spirit, even if no one here has invented seconds. Beyond the camp, the sun is warming the grass. You notice how many skills children must learn simply by being present. Which plants sting, which tracks belong to dangerous animals, how close to stand near fire, how to carry water, how to shape stone, how to listen when someone points toward weather forming over distant hills. Formal classrooms are unnecessary. Daily life is the lesson. This kind of learning is almost invisible archaeologically. Small footprints may survive under exceptional conditions, and miniature tools are sometimes interpreted as objects used by learners. For most prehistoric childhoods, almost nothing remains. That absence matters because children may have made up a large part of many communities. If you imagine only the adults who produced recognizable tools, you are imagining an incomplete camp. There would have been crying, play, mistakes, questions, boredom, imitation, and probably endless requests for food. Some things, apparently, are timeless. As afternoon approaches, the older person rises carefully. A younger adult offers an arm. Together they walk toward the shade. No speech explains the gesture, no inscription records it, and yet you can see how a community exists through thousands of moments like this. A hand offered, a meal divided, a child watched. A skill demonstrated again. The hidden age of humanity becomes less empty when you stop looking only for objects. People survived inside relationships. Most of those relationships vanished without a trace, but every generation depended upon them. You listen to the low voices around the camp and understand that the greatest missing evidence may not be a tool or a shelter. It may be the invisible web between people, the bonds that made one life part of another. By midday, the camp has begun to thin. A few people remain near the shade, but others drift outward across the landscape in small groups. Some carry digging sticks, others have baskets slung over their shoulders. A pair of people head toward the river, while another group moves slowly toward a patch of open ground where low plants grow between stones. You follow. The air is warmer now. Sunlight presses against your shoulders, and dry grass brushes your legs as you walk. Somewhere nearby, insects buzz lazily around flowering plants. There is no field waiting to be harvested, no market stall, no pantry filled with neatly labelled food. Every meal begins with knowledge. For most of human prehistory, people survived by gathering wild plants, hunting animals, fishing, collecting shellfish, trapping smaller creatures, and taking advantage of whatever local environments offered. The exact balance varied enormously. A group living beside a rich coastline would eat differently from people crossing an inland grassland. Forest communities knew different foods from those living near rivers, deserts, or cold northern plains. There was never one universal prehistoric menu. That is worth remembering. Modern images sometimes reduce early human diets to large pieces of meat beside a fire. The reality was usually far more complicated. You stop beside a person kneeling in loose soil. They push a digging stick into the earth and twist. A thick root emerges. It does not look impressive. It is muddy, fibrous, and probably needs processing before it becomes pleasant to eat. Still, underground plant foods can provide valuable carbohydrates. Roots and tubers are especially useful because they may remain available even when fruits or seeds are scarce. The person beside you knows exactly where to look. That knowledge is not obvious from the landscape. To you, the ground looks ordinary. To them, it is a sap of hidden food. They recognize leaves, soil, season, and moisture. One plant is edible, another is bitter, a third may be useful only after soaking or cooking. That information has been learned and remembered across generations. A mistake could mean discomfort or illness. A good memory means dinner. You help place the roots into a woven container. The basket itself will probably disappear from the archaeological record. The roots will vanish too. This is one reason plant foods were once easy to underestimate in reconstructions of prehistoric diets. Animal bones and stone hunting tools often survive more visibly than leaves, berries, or soft plant tissues. Today, researchers can sometimes detect ancient plant use through charred seeds, microscopic starch grains, pollen, residues on tools, and wear patterns on teeth. The invisible part of the meal becomes slightly less invisible. A particularly revealing clue can come from grinding stones. Their surfaces may preserve microscopic traces of plants processed thousands of years ago in some places. Such evidence suggests that people were grinding seeds or starchy plants long before farming became established. So even without cultivated fields, food preparation could be patient and surprisingly elaborate. You continue toward the river. The air cools as you approach the water. Mud presses softly underfoot. A person standing in the shallows watches the surface. They are not waiting randomly. They understand where fish tend to gather, nearby. Someone turns stones at the edge of the water, searching for shellfish or small animals, along coastlines and estuaries. Shellfish could offer a dependable food source. They do not require chasing. They do not run away with quite the enthusiasm of larger animals. This is an underrated quality in a meal. Shell middens found in many parts of the world show that prehistoric communities sometimes collected huge quantities of mollusks over long periods. Layers of discarded shells can become thick deposits, preserving evidence of repeated visits and changing environments from such remains. Researchers may learn what species were eaten, what seasons people visited, and even how coastlines shifted. You lift a shell from the mud. Its surface is cool and ridged. Inside, there is little food compared with a large animal, but food does not have to be dramatic to be valuable. Small resources add up. Shellfish, eggs, nuts, seeds, roots, insects, fish, birds, fruit, wild honey when luck allows. The daily diet is built from opportunities. Farther inland, another group is looking for animal tracks. You follow them only briefly. The mood remains calm. Hunting requires attention, patience, and knowledge, but success is never guaranteed. Animals move, weather changes, tracks fade. Sometimes hunters return with meat, sometimes they return without it. That uncertainty makes gathering especially important. Plant foods and smaller resources can provide a steadier foundation, even when larger hunts fail. Exactly how much meat different prehistoric populations consumed remains difficult to determine. Some specialists emphasize evidence for substantial animal consumption in certain environments. while others point out that plant foods are systematically underrepresented because they decay more easily. The answer changes with place, climate, season, technology, and time, once again. Prehistory refuses to behave like one simple story. You turn back toward camp. By late afternoon, several groups have returned. Their baskets and hands carry different things: roots, nuts, shellfish, a few fish, perhaps some meat from an earlier hunt. Nothing looks like a feast, but together it becomes enough. Preparation begins. Shells are opened near the heat, roots are placed close to coals, seeds may be crushed. Some foods require pounding or soaking, others can be eaten almost immediately. The camp fills with quiet activity. You smell smoke, damp earth, cooked flesh, and something faintly sweet. Food preparation is technology too. Knowing how to make something edible can matter as much as knowing where to find it. Some plants contain toxins or bitter compounds that can be reduced through heating, washing, leaching, grinding, or repeated processing. These techniques are learned, practiced, and passed on. A person looking at the finished meal thousands of years later would never see the knowledge required to create it. You sit beside the fire as food is shared. There are no plates, no forks, no written recipe. Still, there is routine. Someone gives a softer portion to a child. An older person receives food that has been cooked longer. Another person breaks a root and passes half of it across the fire. Sharing reduces risk. One person may have found little today. Another found more. Tomorrow the roles may reverse. That simple exchange helps a mobile group survive unpredictable landscapes. Night begins gathering beyond the camp. You chew slowly. The food is smoky and earthy. Some of it is bland, some surprisingly good. You think about how rarely a meal survives. A tool might remain for hundreds of thousands of years. Dinner disappears by morning, and yet meals structured every day. People travelled for them, learned landscapes through them, shared knowledge because of them, sat together because of them. The hidden age was not lived on empty stomachs beside piles of stone. It was filled with smells, textures, preferences, familiar tastes, disappointing meals, lucky finds, and foods. People probably looked forward to when the right season returned. The fire settles, shells collect near one side of the hearth, a few seeds fall into the ash. Perhaps those scraps will survive. Perhaps one day they will tell someone that people ate here. For now, they are simply leftovers. And as darkness deepens, you understand that the quiet history of food is also the history of knowing where you belong in a landscape. The night has settled fully around the camp, and the air has cooled enough that you notice every gap between fabric and skin. The fire still gives off warmth, but the people around you have drawn coverings closer. One person pulls a hide around their shoulders, another adjusts material around a child's feet, near the edge of the light. Someone bends over a piece of softened skin, working carefully with a pointed tool. You move closer. The material has uneven edges. Its surface carries faint marks from scraping and stretching, yet it is flexible, warm, and carefully prepared. In a world without factory cloth, clothing begins with whatever the landscape can provide. Animal hides are one possibility, especially in colder environments. Plant fibers, bark, grasses, sinew, and other organic materials could also be used for cords, coverings, bags, and garments. Most of these things disappear. That is why prehistoric clothing is so difficult to reconstruct. Stone survives. Fibers usually do not. You sit beside the person working the hide. Their fingers move slowly along the edge. A pointed implement pierces the material. A length of cord or sinew passes through the opening. Push, pull, tighten, repeat. It is sewing. Although the exact tools and methods vary through time, Archaeological evidence shows that eyed bone needles were in use by the later Paleolithic period, with some examples dating back tens of thousands of years. Their presence suggests fitted or carefully constructed garments, rather than simple hides draped loosely around the body. That matters more than it first appears. A cloak can keep some wind away. A fitted sleeve can trap warmth close to the skin. Trousers, leggings, footwear, and layered coverings can make movement through cold environments far easier. Clothing is not merely decoration. It can be survival technology. You look beyond the fire toward the dark landscape. The temperature continues to fall. In Ice Age environments, people sometimes lived where winters were severe and winds cut across open ground. You imagine crossing such a landscape wearing only what your own skin provides. The idea stops being romantic almost immediately. Warm clothing changes what places humans can occupy and helps protect the body from cold, and yet most garments leave almost no trace. The strange result is that some of the most important technology worn every day may have vanished almost completely. A stone point can remain for 40,000 years. The sleeve beside it may disappear within decades. You touch a scrap of hide. It is softer than you expected. That softness required work. Fresh hide does not simply become comfortable clothing. It has to be cleaned, scraped, stretched, dried, softened, and sometimes treated with fats, smoke, or other processes. Different communities developed different methods. You picture someone scraping a hide patiently while others talk nearby. Still, skill accumulates. One generation learns from another. A better way to cut, a stronger seam, a method for keeping a covering flexible after it gets wet. These improvements may never become visible in archaeology. They survive only when an unusual clue remains. Sometimes that clue is microscopic. Researchers have identified wear on stone tools consistent with hide scraping. Bone awls can suggest piercing. Needles reveal stitching. Impressions of twisted fibers occasionally survive in clay or mineral deposits. Even lice have joined the investigation. One of the more unexpected lines of evidence comes from genetic studies of clothing lice. Because clothing lice live primarily in garments rather than directly on the body. Some researchers have used their evolutionary history to estimate when regular clothing use may have become widespread. It is difficult to imagine a less glamorous witness to technological history, thousands of years of human adaptation. And one clue comes from a parasite. The estimate remains uncertain, and specialists do not all agree on how directly the evolution of clothing lice can be translated into a precise date for the appearance of regular clothing. Different models and assumptions can produce different timelines, so the evidence gives you a window, not a calendar. You return your attention to the garment being stitched. The seams are small. The maker tests them with both hands. Perhaps this is a coat, perhaps a bag, perhaps something worn around the legs. You cannot be sure. Clothing also carries meanings beyond warmth. A garment can signal age, identity, skill, group membership, or preference. A belt might carry small objects. A decorated edge could make one garment different from another if feathers, beads, shells, teeth, or pigments were attached. Clothing could become a display of identity. Some decorations survive. Most of the garment beneath them does not. This can create another archaeological illusion. Imagine finding a row of beads in the soil. They may look like a necklace, but perhaps they were sewn onto a hood, a sleeve, a cap, or the edge of a bag, without the vanished material. Interpretation becomes uncertain. One arrangement of beads may support several reconstructions. You begin to appreciate how cautious the language of prehistory must be. Perhaps, possibly, likely. These are not signs of failure. They are signs that the missing material is being respected. Nearby, another person is twisting plant fibers together. Their hands roll the strands against the thigh. combining weak fibers into stronger cord. Cordage is deceptively important. With string, you can tie bundles, attach tools to handles, make nets, repair clothing, and construct shelters. Tiny fiber traces and impressions sometimes reveal this hidden technology. You watch the cord grow longer, twist, join, roll, pull. It is repetitive work, almost meditative. Modern life is filled with manufactured fasteners, buttons, zippers, elastic. Here, a simple cord may do the work of several of them. With considerably less advertising, the comparison makes you smile across the fire. A child is wrapped more tightly against the cold. The covering smells faintly of smoke. That may be deliberate. Smoke can help dry materials and may discourage some insects, though its exact role in different hide preparation traditions is difficult to reconstruct. Again, daily knowledge hides in practical gestures. The night becomes colder. You pull your imagined covering closer. Its weight settles over your shoulders. The sensation is comforting. Suddenly, prehistoric clothing does not feel like an abstract archaeological category. It feels like relief. Warmth held near the body, a barrier against wind, a soft layer between skin and rough ground, a familiar object repaired again and again until it cannot be repaired anymore. Then it is discarded. Rain falls, fibers weaken, hide decays, threads vanish. The person who wore it disappears too, thousands of years later. Perhaps only a bone needle remains, a small object with a tiny eye, easy to overlook, but once you understand what it implies, the empty landscape begins to fill again. Sleeves, bindings, bags, foot coverings, hoods, belts, layers against winter air. The hidden age was not populated by people walking through cold landscapes wrapped in archaeological silence. It was textured, soft, stitched, tied, repaired. And as the fire lowers and everyone settles beneath their coverings, you realize that much of human comfort has always depended on materials too fragile to survive. Morning returns with the smell of smoke still clinging to clothing and hair. The coverings around you are folded away, and the camp begins to stir. Someone lifts a wooden shaft from beside the fire. Another checks a container made from bark or hollowed wood near the edge of the shelter. A child drags a stick through the dust, drawing lines that will disappear before noon. Wood is everywhere, and almost none of it will last. That simple fact changes how you see the entire prehistoric world. For years, popular images of early humanity have been dominated by stone. Stone hand axes, stone blades, stone spear points, stone scrapers displayed under museum lights. But stone may be only the surviving skeleton of a much richer technology. The soft parts are gone. You follow a person carrying a long wooden spear. The shaft is smooth from use. Its surface has been scraped and shaped carefully. One end is hardened and pointed. Perhaps a stone tip will be attached later, or perhaps the sharpened wood itself is enough for the task. Either way, the tool is not crude. Its balance matters. Its straightness matters. The type of wood matters. A branch chosen poorly may split. Another may bend too much. A skilled maker knows which trees provide the right combination of strength, weight, and flexibility. Woodworking therefore requires knowledge of the forest as well as knowledge of tools. You walk beneath tall trees where morning light filters through the leaves. The air smells damp and resinous. Birdsong drifts from somewhere overhead. One person stops beside a fallen branch and tests it with both hands. They bend it slightly, listen to it, examine the grain, then they leave it where it lies. Not good enough. A little farther on, another branch is selected. It will become something useful. The archaeological record gives you rare glimpses of this hidden world. At several prehistoric sites, Wooden spears and other implements have survived because they were buried in unusually wet or oxygen-poor environments. Such discoveries are valuable precisely because wood normally decays so easily. When preserved wooden weapons are found, they can reveal careful shaping, balanced construction, and deliberate choices of raw material. Suddenly, the stone-dominated picture becomes incomplete. You imagine how many wooden objects once existed for everyone that survived. Handles, digging sticks, spear shafts, clubs, tent poles, bowls, trays, frames, hooks, supports, perhaps simple toys, perhaps tools whose purposes would not be obvious even if you found them. Most disappeared quietly into soil. You reach a shallow clearing where someone sits with a stone scraper. A length of wood rests across their knees. The stone tool moves repeatedly along its surface. Scrape. Turn, scrape again. Fine curls and powder fall to the ground. The person is using stone to create wood. This is an important relationship. A stone artifact may have been only one component in a larger tool. A sharp flake could shape a spear shaft. A scraper could smooth a handle. A blade could cut fibers used to bind wooden parts together. When the wooden object decays, the stone tool remains behind, thousands of years later. It can look as if the stone itself was the whole technology. It was not. You begin to think of prehistoric tools as partnerships between materials: stone for cutting, wood for structure, fiber for binding, hide for wrapping, resin for adhesive, bone or antler for points and fittings. A finished tool could combine several substances gathered from different places and prepared through different kinds of knowledge. Only one part may survive. That is why reconstruction requires patience. A curious clue sometimes comes from microscopic wear. The edge of a stone tool can develop tiny polish and scratches after repeated contact with wood, under magnification. These traces may suggest what kind of activity the tool performed. So even when the wooden object has vanished, the stone that shaped it may carry a faint memory of the work. The tool becomes evidence of another tool. You continue toward the river. Someone ahead is carrying a digging stick. It looks almost ridiculously simple, a sturdy piece of wood, one end shaped. Nothing more, but in use, it becomes powerful with it. Roots can be loosened, tubers can be dug from hard soil, small animals can be uncovered, holes can be made, plants can be gathered more efficiently. A simple wooden implement can extend the strength of the human hand. You watch as the point enters the earth. The user leans their weight against it. Soil breaks open. Within minutes, a root is exposed. If the digging stick were abandoned here, it might decay completely. The root would disappear. The basket carrying it away would vanish too. A future archaeologist could excavate this patch of earth and find almost nothing. Yet a full sequence of technology and food gathering has just taken place. The silence of the evidence is not the silence of the activity. Farther downstream, you notice pieces of wood stacked beside a shallow bank. Perhaps they are being prepared for shelter, perhaps for fuel, perhaps for another purpose you cannot identify. This uncertainty matters because many wooden objects do not resemble modern tools. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about how much prehistoric woodworking has been underestimated simply because preservation is so poor. Some specialists argue that early humans were probably far more dependent on wooden technology than museum collections suggest. Others prefer caution, noting that absence of evidence cannot tell you exactly which objects existed in each period. Both positions share the same difficulty. The forest does not preserve its inventions easily. You pick up a short wooden handle. A stone flake has been fixed into one end using binding material. The tool feels different from holding a bare stone, more controlled, more comfortable. The handle allows force to be directed more effectively, hafting. The attachment of stone or bone components to wooden handles or shafts represents a significant technological step. It requires planning. The pieces must fit. Bindings must hold. Adhesive may need to be prepared. Repairs may be necessary. There is no instruction manual. The process survives through teaching. You can imagine someone learning beside the fire. They tie the binding badly. It slips. An older person unwraps it and demonstrates again. Tighter here. Turn the fibre this way. Heat the adhesive carefully. Try once more. The finished tool may last only months. The knowledge can last generations. Near the water, another wooden object surprises you. It is shaped almost like a shallow container. Perhaps food was carried in it. Perhaps water. Wooden vessels are known from some later prehistoric contexts. But their deeper history is difficult to trace because survival depends on exceptional conditions. The object in your hands is light. That matters if you are mobile. A stone bowl may endure for millennia, but carrying one across long distances would quickly make you question your commitment to durable archaeology. Wood is easier on the shoulders. You return the container. By evening, the group has gathered near another temporary camp. Wood surrounds you again. It supports shelters, feeds the fire, extends tools, carries food, shapes movement, creates comfort. Yet almost every piece will vanish. As darkness settles between the trees, you realize that the prehistoric world preserved in museums is only the hard residue of a softer one. The missing world was built from things that bent, burned, cracked, rotted, and returned to the soil. Stone may have survived the journey through time, but wood helped people live it. The fire burns lower as evening settles over the trees. Around you, the wooden tools from the day have been set aside. A spear rests against a trunk. A container sits near the edge of the light. Someone turns a branch in the coals, and a thin ribbon of smoke drifts upward into the dark. Then you hear voices, not words you understand, only rhythm, a short sentence, a pause, a reply from across the fire. Someone laughs softly. A child repeats a sound, receives a correction, and tries again. You listen carefully, knowing that almost nothing you're hearing will survive. Stone can remain, bone can survive, charcoal can be dated. Language disappears with the people who speak it. This is one of the deepest silences in prehistory, long before writing. Human communities almost certainly communicated through complex spoken language, but speech itself leaves no direct fossil. There are no ancient recordings hidden beneath the soil, no preserved conversations, no dictionary scratched into a cave wall. Every language spoken in the distant human past vanished unless some part of it was carried forward through later generations. You sit closer to the fire. The group around you is talking about something. Perhaps tomorrow's route, perhaps food, perhaps a person who is absent, perhaps nothing particularly important. That possibility is easy to forget. Prehistoric speech did not have to consist entirely of survival instructions or sacred stories. People could gossip, complain, tease one another, ask obvious questions, tell jokes that were only funny once. The first spoken sentence of the evening may have been something as ordinary as asking who moved a tool. Humanity did not need writing before becoming conversational. Exactly when fully modern language developed remains one of the great unresolved questions in human evolution. Researchers approach the problem through anatomy, genetics, brain organization, symbolic behavior, and comparison with other primates. But none of these provides a simple date. Some specialists think sophisticated language may have deep roots among earlier members of the human lineage. Others place greater emphasis on later changes associated with Homo sapiens and increasingly complex symbolic cultures. The evidence remains indirect. A fossil skull cannot tell you which stories were told beside a fire, still. Certain physical clues are suggestive. The human vocal tract, breathing control, hearing abilities, and brain all contribute to speech, the hyoid. A small bone in the neck involved in tongue and larynx movement has attracted particular attention. A Neanderthal hyoid discovered at Kibara Cave in Israel resembles that of modern humans in important ways. That does not prove Neanderthals spoke exactly as you do, but it weakens older images of them as creatures capable only of crude noises. You look across the fire and imagine different kinds of humans speaking in different landscapes. Perhaps their languages would sound completely unfamiliar. Perhaps they contained sounds rare in languages today. Perhaps gestures carried more meaning than you expect. Hands move constantly around you. Someone points toward the river. Another person makes a motion suggesting distance. A child raises both palms in a question. Speech and gesture probably work together, as they still do. You might notice that even modern conversation becomes strangely difficult when you force yourself to keep your hands completely still. Humans seem to enjoy giving the air additional information. Language also allows knowledge to travel farther than one person's experience. You do not have to discover every danger yourself. Someone can tell you. Do not drink from that pool after the dry season. The animals cross beyond that ridge. This plant is useful, but that similar one is not. There is shelter 2 days toward the setting sun. Knowledge becomes portable. A person can carry places in speech. You begin to understand how important this would be in a world without written maps. The landscape you crossed earlier exists not only in memory, but in conversation. Routes can be explained. Stories can attach meaning to landmarks. A hill may become more than a hill because something happened there. A river crossing may be remembered through a warning. Speech turns geography into shared knowledge. One lesser-known avenue of research involves the FOXP2 gene, which plays a role in neural systems associated with speech and language in modern humans. Versions of this gene found in Neanderthal remains share important features with those of Homo sapiens. For a time, this discovery generated excitement as a possible clue to ancient speech abilities, but language is far too complex to be explained by a single gene. The finding is interesting. It is not a prehistoric vocabulary hidden in DNA. You listen again to the people nearby. An older person begins speaking for longer than the others. The group becomes quieter. Perhaps this is a story. You cannot know. But oral storytelling would offer a powerful way to preserve information before writing. Events can be remembered through repeated telling. Genealogies can be recited. Rules can be explained. Places can be described. Origins can be imagined. Children can hear things that happened before they were born. Of course, spoken traditions change. Details shift. People forget. New meanings enter. That does not make oral knowledge useless. It simply means memory works differently from a written archive. You watch the children. They are learning constantly. Language gives adults a way to teach without requiring demonstration every time. A child can be warned about a dangerous animal before meeting one. A person can learn how to find water in a valley they have never visited. Instructions can describe a sequence of actions. First strike here, then turn the stone. Do not heat the resin too quickly. Language allows experience to leap between minds. Yet almost every one of those instructions is archaeologically invisible. A tool survives. The lesson does not. The distinction becomes important when archaeologists study technological complexity. If a method requires many stages, planning, and precise cooperation, some researchers see that as consistent with advanced communication, but others caution against using tool complexity as a simple measure of linguistic ability. Humans can learn through observation. Gestures can teach. Repeated practice matters. The relationship between language and technology is close, but difficult to separate cleanly after tens of thousands of years. The fire cracks softly. Someone beside you imitates the call of an animal. A few people smile. Perhaps imitation helped during hunting. Perhaps it is part of a story. Perhaps someone simply enjoys making the sound. A curious fact about language is that most of the thousands spoken today belong to families connected through shared ancestry. But the farther you try to reconstruct them backward, the less certain the relationships become. Historical linguistics can reach impressively deep into the past in some cases, but eventually the trail fades, sound changes accumulate, words are replaced, languages split and merge. Beyond a certain point, ancient speech becomes almost impossible to recover confidently. The languages of the people around this fire may have entire histories stretching back thousands of years before this evening. You will never hear those earlier forms, nor will anyone in the distant future hear this one. The thought feels strangely intimate. A person across from you says something and smiles. The sentence exists for only a moment. Air moves through the throat and mouth. Sound crosses the fire, someone understands, then it is gone, no artifact remains, and yet speech may be one of the most important technologies humans ever developed. It coordinates movement, carries memory, builds relationships, preserves knowledge, creates jokes, promises, warnings, arguments, and stories. Almost none of it survives directly. The night grows quieter. One by one, the voices stop. The final conversation fades into breathing and the faint movement of leaves overhead. Tomorrow, the camp may leave stone, ash, and bone behind, but the words will leave nothing at all. And as you sit in the darkness, you realize that the hidden age was filled with voices. History simply arrived too late to hear them. Morning comes with a thin mist between the trees. The fire has gone cold, and the voices from the night before have vanished with it. You rise, stretch stiff shoulders, and follow the group toward higher ground. The path climbs slowly. Roots cross the soil, damp leaves cling to your feet. Somewhere beyond the ridge, water moves over stone with a steady, almost sleepy sound. Then the landscape changes. The forest opens into a broad valley, and for a moment you imagined that the people walking beside you are the only humans anywhere nearby. But they may not be. There were periods in prehistory when Homo sapiens shared the world with other kinds of humans. Neanderthals lived across large parts of Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans, known mostly through genetic evidence and a small number of fossils, occupied parts of Asia. Other human relatives survived in different regions as well. The human world was once more crowded with cousins than it is today. You pause at the edge of the valley and consider what that means. Not monsters, not half-formed creatures waiting to become modern humans. People, different people. They made tools, controlled fire, moved through seasonal landscapes, cared for members of their groups, and in at least some cases, they met Homo sapiens closely enough to have children together. Genetic evidence has transformed the way this ancient meeting's understood. Many people with ancestry outside Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, while some populations in Asia and Oceania carry additional ancestry linked to Denisovans. This tells you something extraordinary. These groups did not always remain separate. At some points, their paths crossed. You walk down into the valley. The grass is wet against your legs. Ahead, smoke rises faintly from somewhere beyond a line of trees. You imagine another camp. Perhaps the people there are Neanderthals. The scene would not necessarily look dramatically different. A fire, stone tools, food being processed, children near adults, someone repairing equipment, someone watching the weather. Older images of Neanderthals often presented them as brutish, slow, and culturally inferior. That picture has weakened considerably. Evidence from many sites indicates that Neanderthals were skilled hunters. used sophisticated stone technologies, exploited varied foods, and adapted successfully to demanding environments for hundreds of thousands of years. Some sites also contain pigments, modified objects, or other traces that may point toward symbolic behavior. The interpretation is not always simple. There is still considerable uncertainty over how common symbolic practices were among Neanderthals, and how closely they resembled those of Homo sapiens. Some researchers see strong evidence for comparable cognitive abilities. Others argue that the frequency, context, and complexity of certain behaviors remain different. You do not need to settle the question while standing in this valley. The imagined smoke continues to rise. You simply allow the possibility of another human group nearby. Perhaps they speak a language you cannot understand. Perhaps their gestures are familiar. Perhaps both groups recognize one another from earlier encounters. Perhaps they avoid each other completely. Prehistoric contact was probably not one single story. Different meetings may have involved curiosity, exchange, competition, intermarriage, avoidance, or simple indifference. Human beings are capable of quite a range of social responses, and there is little reason to assume prehistory was tidier. You continue along the valley floor, a small stone lies near your foot. Its shape reminds you of tools you have seen earlier. But technological traditions vary. Neanderthal industries in parts of Europe and Western Asia often included carefully prepared stone cores designed to produce flakes of predictable shapes. This required planning. The maker had to imagine later steps before striking the first ones. A stone tool is not proof of a particular personality, but it does perceive foresight. Then there are the Denisovans. Their story feels even more ghost-like. For years, they were known largely from a few fragments recovered at Denisova Cave in Siberia and from genetic material. A tiny finger bone from the cave helped reveal an entire population of ancient humans that researchers had not previously recognized. It is difficult to think of a better example of how little evidence can carry an enormous story. One small fragment, one laboratory analysis, suddenly, another branch of humanity appears. Later discoveries and genetic research expanded that picture. But Denisovans remain far more elusive archaeologically than Neanderthals. A particularly curious detail comes from a bone fragment found at Denisova Cave that belonged to a girl with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. She has sometimes been informally nicknamed Denny. Her existence gives you an almost startlingly personal glimpse into ancient contact. Not abstract populations on a diagram, a child, two lineages, one life. You think back to the family relationships around earlier fires. Here, genetics reaches into that invisible web and briefly illuminates it. The valley narrows. Cool air moves between rock walls. You wonder what these different humans thought when they encountered one another. Did appearance make differences obvious? Could they communicate? Did they recognize familiar technologies? Did they exchange materials? The archaeological record offers hints, but very few direct scenes. Experts continue to interpret possible evidence of cultural exchange in different ways. Some technological changes may reflect contact, others may have developed independently. Similar solutions can appear when people face similar problems. This makes ancient influence difficult to prove. Two groups may make comparable tools without ever meeting, or a single encounter may transmit an idea that spreads far beyond the people who first exchanged it. You reach a shallow cave. The temperature drops immediately inside. Water drips somewhere in the darkness. Layers of sediment rest beneath your feet, one above another. A place like this might preserve occupations by different human groups separated by centuries or millennia. One layer could contain Neanderthal material, another might be associated with Homo sapiens. Between them lies time. the cave itself becomes a shared address used by people who may never have met. You run your hand lightly across the cold wall at some prehistoric sites. Evidence once attributed confidently to one population has later been reconsidered after new dating methods, genetic analysis, or discoveries changed the picture. Prehistory is full of revisions. That is not weakness. It is how science behaves when new evidence arrives. The story grows less comfortable but more interesting. You step outside again. Late sunlight reaches the valley. For a brief moment, you imagine several kinds of humans walking beneath the same sky. Different faces, different histories, different adaptations, yet close enough that some of their descendants became part of one another. Today, only Homo sapiens remains. Why the others disappeared is still not explained by a single cause. Climate shifts, small population sizes, competition, assimilation, disease, and demographic pressures have all been considered. The balance probably differed between regions. The ending may have been gradual rather than sudden. Some groups may not have vanished completely in a genetic sense. Part of them lives on. You look at the quiet valley one last time. The other humans are gone from the landscape. But not entirely from the human story. A few bones remain, some tools remain, fragments of DNA remain, and hidden within millions of people today are faint biological echoes of meetings that happened beneath skies like this one. The age of many humanities has ended, but its traces are still walking with you. Those traces travel with you as the valley opens toward a much wider horizon. The ground rises gradually beneath your feet until, by late morning, you're standing on a ridge where the world seems to stretch without end. Grasslands fade into distant hills. Beyond them lie forests you cannot see clearly. Farther still, perhaps mountains. There are no signs telling you where one region finishes and another begins. No border posts, no road markers, only land. And somewhere in the immense human past, generations of people began moving through landscapes like this one, gradually carrying Homo sapiens into places our species had never occupied before. You start walking. The pace is slow. That matters. When people speak about prehistoric migrations, modern maps can make them look like arrows. A line begins in one region and ends in another. It seems almost as if thousands of people packed their belongings one morning and announced that they were relocating to another continent. The reality was far quieter. Most great prehistoric expansions probably unfolded across many generations. A family moved into a neighboring valley. Their descendants traveled farther. Children grew up knowing a landscape their grandparents had never seen. Then their children moved again. No single traveller needed to understand the enormous journey taking place. You follow a river eastward, its banks are lined with reeds, and small birds rise when you approach. Water makes the route easier to imagine. Rivers provide drinking water, plants, animals, fish, and recognizable corridors through unfamiliar country. Coastlines may have offered similar advantages. A shore can guide movement without a map. Keep the sea on one side and land on the other, and the world becomes slightly easier to navigate. Evidence from fossils, archaeology, and genetics indicates that Homo sapiens originated in Africa and later expanded into other parts of the world. Those movements were not a single departure. Populations moved, mixed, sometimes disappeared, and sometimes returned. The story resembles many overlapping journeys rather than one clean march across the globe. You descend from the ridge. By afternoon, the landscape has become drier, dust clings to your ankles, the river thins. Ahead, people stop beneath sparse trees while someone searches for signs of water. Movement into new territory carries risk. A familiar landscape tells you what grows after rain. An unfamiliar one does not. You may not know which valley floods. You may not recognize a poisonous plant. You may not know where animals migrate during the dry season. Travel, therefore, depends on observation and patience. You begin reading the land the way the people around you do. Animal tracks lead toward lower ground. Birds circle near vegetation. Clouds gathering over mountains may hint at weather farther ahead. A line of trees suggests moisture. Nothing is guaranteed, but each clue reduces uncertainty. Human expansion across the planet required this repeated ability to enter unfamiliar environments and slowly make them familiar. Some of those environments were astonishingly different. Tropical forests, cold steppe, high mountains, deserts, coastlines, river valleys. Eventually, people reached landscapes affected by severe seasonal cold and places separated by water. That versatility is one of the striking features of our species. Still, researchers interpret the timing and routes of particular migrations differently as new discoveries appear. Coastal routes receive considerable attention in discussions of early movement into parts of Asia and the Americas. While inland pathways remain important in other models, sea level change complicates the question because many ancient coastlines now lie underwater. The road, in a sense, has drowned. You continue walking until the dry ground gives way to a broad coastal plain. The sea is far in the distance. In colder periods, global sea levels were lower because enormous quantities of water were locked in ice sheets. Areas that are seabed today were once exposed land. Some islands were larger, some straits were narrower. Other regions that are now separated by water were connected. The map of the prehistoric world was not your map. You stand on ground that, in the modern age, might lie beneath waves. The realization is strangely peaceful. Fish would now be swimming where your feet are. A little unfair to future archaeologists, perhaps. Along the shore, people collect shellfish while others repair tools. You notice that travel does not mean constant movement. Groups stop. They rest. They remain for a season. They learn. A place becomes familiar before the next journey begins. Children born here may think of this coast as home. Their parents remember another river. Their grandparents may have known hills hundreds of kilometers away. Migration becomes family memory. One unusual clue to ancient movement comes not from human bones, but from the materials people carried. Shells found far inland, stone transported far from geological sources, and ornaments made from non-local materials can reveal connections between distant places. A tiny bead may have travelled farther than the person eventually buried beside it. Objects move through friendships, exchanges, partnerships, and repeated encounters. So when you find something far from home, you cannot automatically assume its owner personally completed the whole journey. Sometimes people moved, sometimes things moved, often both did. Evening arrives beside the coast. Cool wind comes from the water. You smell salt in the air. Several people are looking toward a channel separating the shore from land visible in the distance. Water crossings introduce another mystery. At various times, humans reached islands that could not always have been accessed simply by walking across exposed land. That suggests some form of water travel. The vessels themselves are mostly gone. Wood decays. Fibre bindings disappear. A raft or simple boat can carry people across water and then leave almost no archaeological trace. Once again, one of the crucial technologies may be missing. You imagine the crossing. No engine, no compass, no weather forecast. Only a craft made from available materials and knowledge gathered through experience. The water lifts and lowers beneath you. Wind touches your face. The destination looks small from here. Did people sometimes drift accidentally to new land? Certainly possible. Were other crossings planned? Many researchers suspect so, particularly when repeated settlement required enough people, tools, and knowledge to establish communities. Exactly how deliberate some early voyages were remains difficult to prove. The ocean keeps that secret well. You return to solid ground in your imagination and continue north. Generations pass around you. The people change. The landscape changes. The movement continues. Eventually, human populations reach astonishingly distant regions. Australia was inhabited tens of thousands of years ago, requiring ancestors of its first peoples to cross stretches of water somewhere along their journey much later. People spread through the remote islands of the Pacific with increasingly sophisticated maritime traditions. In another direction, humans entered the Americas, though the timing and exact routes of the earliest arrivals continue to be refined as archaeological evidence develops. You do not experience these movements as conquest. There is no dramatic music, mostly. You walk, you stop when someone is tired, you search for water, you gather food, you sleep beneath a shelter. Then one morning you walk again. That is how a species can cross a planet, not by knowing the destination, by knowing the next place. You climb another ridge as darkness approaches. Behind you lie landscapes remembered by parents and grandparents. Ahead lies country no one in your group knows well. The unknown is not empty. Animals live there. Rivers move there. Other humans may already be there. You step forward anyway, and across thousands of such ordinary steps, the human world becomes larger. The ridge ahead looks inviting until the wind reaches you. It arrives cold and dry, sweeping across the open ground and pushing loose grass flat against the earth. The warmth of the previous coast feels suddenly distant. You pull your covering closer and keep walking. The landscape has changed again. Trees are sparse here. Low shrubs cling to sheltered places farther away. Broad stretches of grass disappear beneath a pale sky. This is one of the difficulties of imagining the prehistoric world. The climate did not remain comfortably fixed while humans moved through it. Temperatures rose, temperatures fell, rainfall shifted, ice sheets expanded and retreated. Forests moved across continents, then withdrew. Rivers changed course. Grasslands appeared where woodland had once grown. Place that supported abundant food for several generations could become colder, drier, wetter, or less predictable. You walk through a world that refuses to stay still during the Pleistocene, the long geological period covering much of human evolution. Repeated glacial and warmer intervals reshaped enormous areas of the planet. At colder times, vast ice sheets covered parts of northern Europe and North America. Sea levels fell. Regions beyond the ice became colder and often drier. Then conditions warmed again. Ice melted. Vegetation spread into new territory. Animals followed. Humans followed too. The changes were not always smooth. Some shifts could happen surprisingly quickly on geological timescales. You stop beside a shallow hollow where a small group is examining the ground. There should be water here. The shape of the land suggests that water once collected in this place, but the hollow is dry. Cracked mud covers the bottom. Someone kneels and touches it. No one panics. The group simply begins discussing another route. This is what climate change means at the scale of everyday life. Not graphs, not percentages. A spring that no longer fills. Animals arriving later than expected. Fruit ripen indifferently. Snow remaining longer on a mountain pass. A river becoming dangerous after unusual rain. The consequences arrive as practical problems. You turn south. Several hours later, the wind softens. The ground slopes toward a valley where a few trees survive near water. Places like this could become refuges during difficult periods, when wider regions became too cold or dry. Pockets of relatively favorable habitat sometimes allowed plants, animals, and human populations to persist. Later, when conditions improved, populations could expand outward again. Genetic studies of both humans and other species sometimes preserve faint signs of these periods of contraction and expansion. The landscape leaves marks not only in soil, but in ancestry. You sit near the water, it is cold enough to make your fingers ache. Nearby, someone watches a herd moving across the distant plain. Animals respond to climate just as humans do. Their ranges shift when vegetation changes. Some disappear from a region completely, others arrive for the first time. If your group depends heavily on a particular animal, you must move with it or learn something new. That ability to change may have been one of humanity's greatest advantages. Tools can be modified, food choices can broaden, shelters can improve, clothing can become warmer, routes can change, knowledge can be shared. Survival does not always belong to the strongest individual. Sometimes it belongs to the group most willing to adjust. A fascinating clue to ancient climate comes from places far removed from human camps. Ice cores drilled from Greenland and Antarctica contain layers formed from snowfall accumulated over immense periods. Tiny bubbles trapped in the ice preserve samples of ancient atmosphere. Chemical signals in those layers help researchers reconstruct past temperatures and environmental changes. A cylinder of old ice can therefore reveal conditions experienced by people who left no written description of the weather. It is an oddly elegant archive. The humans are almost invisible. The snow remembered for them. You continue walking as afternoon clouds gather. The temperature drops again. One person points toward the sky. The group changes direction, heading toward a rocky shelter before the weather arrives. Knowledge of climate is not only knowledge of long trends. It is daily observation, cloud shapes, wind direction, animal behavior, the smell of approaching rain. A generation that lives in one region may develop a detailed understanding of its patterns, but what happens when the patterns change? That question still occupies researchers studying periods of prehistoric environmental instability. Some interpretations link major changes in population, movement, or technology closely to climate shifts. Other specialists are more cautious, arguing that human behavior also depended on social networks, population size, local ecology, and cultural choices. The same cold period could affect two neighboring communities differently. Climate matters enormously, but it does not control every decision like a puppeteer. You reach the shelter just before rain begins. Drops strike stone outside. The sound is steady and soft. Inside, people gather close together. Someone checks the firewood. Another wraps a child more tightly. You can smell wet earth moving in with the wind. Perhaps the storm lasts an hour. Perhaps all night for you. It is merely uncomfortable. For a group with little stored food, several days of bad weather can matter. Mobility offers one solution. If conditions deteriorate for long enough, people can leave, but movement creates its own difficulties. Another valley may already be occupied. A mountain route may be blocked. Old people and children may travel slowly. Knowledge becomes less reliable in unfamiliar territory. Adaptation always has a cost. Outside, rainwater begins running in narrow lines down the rock. You think about animals that did not survive these changing worlds. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer. Many other large species disappeared near the end of the Pleistocene in different regions. Their extinctions have produced long-running arguments. Climate change clearly transformed habitats. Human hunting and landscape use may also have contributed in some places. The balance between these causes varies by species and region, and no single explanation fits every extinction neatly. The old debate remains active because ecosystems are complicated things. One curious detail lies in frozen ground. In parts of Siberia and other northern regions, permafrost has preserved hair, skin, stomach contents, and even dung from Ice Age animals. Such discoveries can reveal what extinct creatures were eating and what vegetation surrounded them. The preservation is extraordinary precisely because most landscapes are far less generous. Cold can destroy comfort while preserving evidence. Another prehistoric contradiction. The rain weakens. You step outside. Everything smells different. Dust has become mud. Plants shine with water. A small stream begins forming where the dry hollow had seemed lifeless. The world has changed again in less than an hour. You imagine the same process unfolding across centuries. A valley grows wetter, trees return, herds alter their routes, people adjust. Children grow up thinking the new conditions are normal. Their grandparents remember something else. That may be how climate change was experienced most often, not as the end of the world, as the world becoming unfamiliar. You walk onward beneath clearing clouds. Cold air settles in the low places. Behind you, rain darkens the rock shelter. Ahead, sunlight touches another valley. The people around you keep moving between these shifting environments, carrying tools, children, memories, and stories. They do not control the climate. They listen to it, adapt to it, sometimes escape it, and through repeated cold, warmth, drought, rain, and uncertainty, humanity continues its quiet journey across a planet that has never promised to remain the same. The valley ahead grows quieter as evening returns. The rain has passed, leaving the ground dark and soft beneath your feet. Water clings to leaves. Small drops fall from branches at irregular intervals, each one making a faint sound in the stillness. The group slows near a rocky slope. At first, you think they are simply searching for shelter. Then you notice that one person is carrying something wrapped carefully in hide. The mood has changed. No one is speaking loudly. You follow at a distance. Prehistoric archaeology becomes especially delicate when it reaches death, burial, and symbolism. A stone tool can tell you how someone shaped rock. A hearth can suggest where people gathered. A grave may seem more personal. Yet even here, certainty remains limited. Bodies have been intentionally buried in many prehistoric contexts, sometimes with objects, pigments, food remains, or carefully arranged materials nearby. Such practices can reveal that the dead were treated differently from ordinary refuse. But what those actions meant to the people performing them is much harder to know. You reach a shallow depression beside the rock. Several people begin preparing the ground. Hands and wooden tools loosen the soil. The smell of wet earth rises around you. No priest appears. No written prayer survives. No carved explanation tells you why this place matters. You see only actions. A body placed carefully, hands adjusting its position, a covering drawn close. Perhaps a few objects set nearby. Then soil returning slowly over everything. It is tempting to fill the silence. Respect, grief, belief in another world, fear of the dead, memory. All are possible. None can be assumed automatically. This is one of the places where archaeology asks for patience. An intentional burial shows deliberate treatment. It does not provide a complete theology. You watch as someone opens a small container. Inside is red pigment, ochre. Iron-rich earth pigments appear at many prehistoric sites and were used in different ways over immense spans of time. They could colour bodies, objects, surfaces, hides, or other materials. In some burials, red ochre was scattered over or around the dead. The colour is striking, against pale soil. It glows warmly even in fading light. Why red? That question has produced many interpretations. Some researchers connect it with blood, life, identity, ritual, or transformation. Others emphasize practical uses of ochre as well, including possible roles in hide processing or adhesives. The same material may have served several purposes. A pigment does not carry one permanent meaning across all cultures. You kneel beside a small fragment of ochre. Its surface has been rubbed smooth. Someone handled it repeatedly. That touch may be more certain than any symbolic interpretation. Another person places small shells near the burial. They have holes through them. Perhaps they were strung together, perhaps sewn onto clothing, perhaps carried as personal ornaments. Personal ornaments appear in several regions of the prehistoric world, and their presence can suggest communication through appearance. A bead may express membership, age, status, relationship, or simply taste. Humans have probably enjoyed making themselves visually distinctive for a very long time. You imagine someone spending hours piercing shells, threading them, arranging them, then deciding that one of them is slightly crooked and starting again. Even prehistory may have known the quiet tyranny of decorative perfection. A more unusual clue comes from wear patterns on beads. Tiny polish and scratches can sometimes show whether an ornament was strung, sewn, or rubbed against other objects for long periods. The marks may reveal that something was worn repeatedly rather than made only for burial. That distinction matters. An object placed with the dead may have belonged to the person during life. It may have been a gift, or it may have been created specifically for the ceremony. The evidence permits several stories. Night begins closing around the slope. A fire is lit nearby. Its glow flickers across the disturbed soil. You think of other prehistoric burials discovered far from this imagined place. Some contain carefully positioned bodies. Some include tools. Others include animal parts, ornaments, or pigment. Many contain nothing obvious at all. Even identifying a deliberate burial can sometimes be difficult when natural processes disturb bones after death. One specialist may see careful placement. Another may see a body naturally covered by sediment. The argument can turn on details of anatomy, soil, sediment, animal disturbance, and site formation. There is no single pattern for the entire prehistoric world. That variety itself is important. Humans were never culturally identical. You leave the burial and follow the group toward a rock shelter inside. Firelight touches the walls. Marks appear in the glow. Lines, dots, shapes. Some may be natural. Others clearly are not. The deeper prehistoric record contains engraved objects, painted surfaces, geometric signs, hand stencils, figurines, ornaments, and other forms of visual expression. Some of the most famous cave art in Europe dates to the Upper Paleolithic, but symbolic behavior is not confined to one region or one type of human. Pigments and engraved objects also appear in African and Asian contexts. There are even controversial examples associated with Neanderthals. The old idea that symbolic thought suddenly appeared in one place at one moment has become increasingly difficult to maintain. Instead, the evidence suggests a more complicated development, with symbolic behaviors appearing in different forms across different populations and periods. You hold a small engraved object near the light. Its lines are deliberate, repeated, perhaps patterned. What do they mean? You cannot tell. They might represent counting, ownership, decoration, a group sign, a memory device, or something completely outside modern categories. This is where interpretation becomes especially fragile. A pattern can be intentional without being readable. You can know someone meant to make it. You cannot automatically know what they meant by it. That is one of the gentlest frustrations of prehistory. Meaning can survive as shape while explanation disappears. You move deeper into the shelter. The wall is cold beneath your fingertips. A hand stencil appears farther along, a palm shape surrounded by pigment. For a moment, it feels almost startlingly immediate. Someone stood here, Someone placed a hand against stone. Someone blew or applied pigment around it. Then they removed the hand. The body vanished. The outline remained. It is difficult not to feel close to that person. Still, even something as familiar as a handprint can resist interpretation. Was it a signature, a ritual act, a marker of presence? Part of teaching, part of a larger image now lost. There is no surviving caption. The wall remains quiet. Outside, the burial place has disappeared into darkness. Inside, symbols hover in firelight. You begin to understand that prehistoric belief may be one of the largest missing worlds of all. People probably had stories about death, stories about animals, places, ancestors, dreams, weather, origins, perhaps spirits, perhaps forces that do not fit modern religious language at all. Almost none of that can be recovered directly. What survives are gestures, a body placed carefully, a shell worn smooth, a patch of ochre, a repeated pattern, a hand against stone. You sit near the entrance as the fire lowers. The people around you speak softly. Their meanings remain unreachable, but their actions suggest that life contained more than food, movement, and survival. People decorated, remembered, marked, buried, created, perhaps wondered, and when the last voices fade, the symbols remain behind, quiet invitations from a world that left meaning without explanation. The rock shelter is behind you by morning. You follow the group toward the sound of water. At first, the path descends through low vegetation. The air grows softer. Salt enters the wind. Birds circle somewhere ahead, their calls carried inland. Then the land opens. A broad coastal plain stretches toward a distant sea. It looks ordinary: grass, pools, sand, low dunes, a river winding toward the horizon. But this landscape carries one of the greatest tricks in prehistoric archaeology. Much of it will disappear during colder phases of the Ice Age. Enormous quantities of water were locked inside continental ice sheets. Global sea levels fell, exposing vast areas of land that are underwater today. Coastlines often lay many kilometers farther from their modern positions. Places where people walked, hunted, gathered shellfish, made fires, raised children, and returned season after season can now lie beneath waves. You step onto ground that does not exist on a modern map. Nothing here looks temporary. The river is full. Reeds move in the breeze. Small shells lie in wet sand. Someone nearby gathers plants beside a lagoon, yet thousands of years from now. Fish may swim above this place. You walk toward the shore. The sand is cool beneath your feet. A group has camped beside a low rise protected from the wind. There are hearths, stone flakes, broken shells, and wooden objects laid near the water. It is exactly the sort of place people might choose repeatedly. Coasts can offer varied food: fish, shellfish, seabirds, marine mammals in some regions, edible wetland plants, fresh water where rivers meet the sea. They can also provide natural travel corridors. If you know the shoreline, you can follow it across great distances without memorizing every inland valley. That makes drowned coastlines especially important when researchers think about early human movement. Sea levels rose dramatically after the last glacial maximum as ice sheets melted, by roughly the middle Holocene. Much of the rise toward modern levels had occurred, though local shorelines behaved differently depending on geology and land movement. The result is simple to state and difficult to fix. A huge part of the archaeological landscape is missing from dry land. You sit near the water while someone opens a shell. A stone taps against the edge. Inside is a modest amount of food. The shell is tossed onto a growing pile. If enough shells accumulate, the deposit may survive as a midden, but if the shoreline later floods, waves can scatter it. Currents can bury it. Marine organisms can disturb it. Sediment may cover the entire site beneath meters of sand. Archaeologists searching only on present coastlines may therefore be looking in the wrong place. The ancient coast is farther out, sometimes much farther. You look toward the sea. Beyond the breakers, the continental shelf slopes downward during low sea level. Parts of that shelf were open plains crossed by humans and animals. A less familiar example lies beneath the North Sea. The region often called Doggerland once connected Britain with continental Europe. It contained rivers, wetlands, and dry land used by prehistoric people before rising seas gradually submerged it. Fishing vessels have occasionally brought up animal bones, stone artifacts, and other remains from areas that were once habitable landscapes. The sea floor has become an archaeological archive, an inconvenient one. Excavating underwater is difficult, expensive, and slow. Visibility can be poor. Currents interfere, sites may be deeply buried. Modern researchers use sonar, sediment cores, seismic survey, diving, remotely operated equipment, and computer models to reconstruct lost landscapes. Sometimes old river channels can be mapped beneath the seabed. A buried valley appears, a former lake, a ridge that may once have offered dry ground above marshes. The coastline returns, not as a photograph, but as a shape beneath sediment. You begin walking along the ancient beach. Children search among shells. Someone carries a wooden container. Another person repairs a tool beside a small fire. This scene raises an important question. How much did early humans rely on coasts? The answer is not straightforward. In some periods and regions, archaeological evidence clearly shows substantial use of marine resources. Elsewhere, coastal occupation may be invisible because the relevant sites are now submerged. Some specialists suspect shorelines played a larger role in human dispersal and diet than surviving land sites suggest. Others remain cautious, noting that underwater evidence is still too patchy to turn every missing coast into a major migration route. The uncertainty comes from missing geography as much as missing artifacts. At the mouth of the river, someone watches the tide. That knowledge matters. Coastal living requires understanding rhythms unlike those of inland landscapes. Tides expose food and then cover it. Storms reshape beaches. Fresh water may become salty near estuaries if simple watercraft are used. Currents and weather matter too. You remember the journeys across water from earlier in your travels. Rafts, boats, paddles, ropes, and nets would often be made from materials that decay. Now add rising sea level. The technology disappears, and then the place where it was used disappears too. A whole chapter of human life can be erased twice. One intriguing clue can come from submerged forests in some coastal areas. Storms and shifting sediment occasionally expose ancient tree stumps rooted in land that now lies below the tide. The trees stand where forests once grew. Nearby sediments may preserve pollen, seeds, animal tracks, or human material. For a brief time, the vanished landscape becomes visible before sand or water covers it again. You imagine standing among those drowned trees. Their roots are black with water. Seaweed clings to wood that once stood above dry soil. The present ocean moves through an ancient woodland. It is hard to find a clearer reminder that landscapes have histories too. The afternoon tide begins to rise around your imagined camp. People gather baskets and tools. Sea level rise on the scale that transforms continents is usually slow compared with one human lifetime. People do not wake one morning to find an entire plain gone. The change creeps. A familiar sandbar floods more often. Salt enters a freshwater marsh. Storms reach farther inland. A campsite moves uphill. Children grow up using a shoreline different from the one their grandparents remember. Eventually, the old place becomes a story. Then even the story fades. You climb to higher ground and look back. The coastal plain is broad beneath the evening light. Smoke rises from small fires. People move along the river. Nothing announces that this landscape is temporary. But you know what comes later? Ice melts, water rises, the river mouth shifts inland, the plain narrows, the camp disappears beneath sediment and sea. Thousands of years later, researchers will wonder where the evidence went. Some of it is still there, only hidden beneath dark water, and as the tide quietly advances over your footprints, you realize that the hidden age of humanity is not buried only beneath soil. Part of it is sleeping beneath the ocean. You leave the drowned shoreline slowly behind you. The tide moves over ground where people once walked, and ahead. The land rises into a quiet plain under evening light. Grass bends softly in the breeze, somewhere far away. Birds settle into reeds. For the first time in this long journey, you stop trying to follow one group. Instead, you look back across the entire hidden age, the camps, the fires, the stone flakes, the children learning beside adults, the wooden tools that vanished, the clothes that returned to soil, the voices that disappeared the moment they were spoken. What remains is astonishingly little. And yet it is enough to know that the emptiness was never empty. For most of the existence of Homo sapiens, there were no written records. Our species had already lived for hundreds of thousands of years before writing appeared in a few parts of the world. Cities, states, chronicles, and named rulers belonged to a very recent portion of the human story. Everything before that had to be remembered in other ways, through bodies, through habits, through stories, through landscapes, through things made by hand. You begin walking again. The ground seems ordinary, but you know how misleading ordinary ground can be. A patch of soil may contain a hearth. A gravel bar may hide flakes struck from stone thousands of generations ago. A cave may preserve ash, bone, pigment, and a single tooth. A lake bed may contain pollen from plants that no longer grow nearby. A dry patch of earth may once have been a shoreline. Even emptiness has layers. Archaeology is partly the art of noticing when silence has structure. You imagine researchers arriving at one of the camps you visited earlier. They do not see the people. They see stains in soil, a scatter of stone, burned fragments, perhaps a few bones. From this, they try to rebuild behavior. They measure, compare, date, map, test. Then they disagree. That disagreement is often the only honest response to incomplete evidence. One specialist may see a short hunting stop. Another may see a repeatedly visited campsite. One may interpret a cluster of objects as deliberate arrangement. Another may think water or animals moved them. The evidence can support more than one story. The challenge is to discover which explanation survives the closest examination. You stop beside a low mound. Tiny fragments of charcoal are mixed into the soil, if enough preserved carbon remains. They may be dated using radiocarbon methods. Radiocarbon dating transformed archaeology because it allowed organic remains from many prehistoric contexts to be placed into more reliable chronological frameworks. But even this powerful method has limits. It works best within a certain time range, and samples can be contaminated. Older periods require other techniques. Dating the deep past is therefore less like reading a clock and more like building several clocks and checking whether they agree. The past does not surrender all at once. It gives small permissions. A date here, a footprint there, a fragment of DNA. A seed turned black by fire, a microscopic grain of starch caught on a tool. One quieter source of evidence is pollen. Pollen grains can survive for long periods in lake and bog sediments. By identifying plants represented in different layers, researchers can reconstruct changing vegetation and climate. A grain too small for you to notice while walking can help rebuild an ancient landscape. The idea feels appropriate. The hidden age is often recovered from things that seem almost too small to matter. You reach the edge of a lake. The surface reflects evening sky. Around you, imagined centuries begin to overlap. One group arrives, then another. 1,000 years pass. The shoreline moves. Trees spread. The lake shrinks. People return. More time passes. Sediment covers everything. Eventually, someone kneels with a trowel and notices a difference in color. This is how time compresses. A human life may last decades. An archaeological layer can contain remains of activity separated by years or centuries. To you, standing here, the difference matters enormously. To the Earth, it may be only a few centimeters. That is why the hidden age should not be imagined as one continuous primitive world. People changed. Technologies changed. Environments changed. Languages changed. Social customs changed. A community living 40,000 years ago was not simply an earlier version of one living 10,000 years later. They had different histories behind them, different neighbors, different memories, different problems. Prehistory contains more diversity than any single reconstruction can hold. There is still no full agreement on how much of that diversity has been lost beyond recovery. Some researchers suspect that the surviving archaeological record represents only a tiny fraction of the places people actually used. Others emphasize that repeated patterns across many sites can still reveal broad features of behavior. Both ideas can be true. The record is incomplete, and it is informative. You can know something without knowing everything. That may be the most important lesson of this journey. You think again about the people beside the first river. You never learned their names. But now they no longer feel like shadows. You have watched people carry children across long distances. You have seen hide stitched near firelight. You have followed footsteps toward water. You have watched someone choose wood carefully and another person teach stoneworking through repetition. You have sat beside meals that left almost nothing behind. You have listened to speech you could not understand. You have stood near burials whose meanings remained private. You have imagined meetings between different kinds of humans. You have walked across plains now covered by sea. No single scene can be proven exactly as you experienced it. It is reconstruction built from evidence, comparison, and cautious imagination. But the broad truth remains. Human beings lived richly before history learned to write them down. They made choices. They adapted. They cared. They argued. They remembered. They forgot. They moved through landscapes with knowledge accumulated over generations. Most of those generations disappeared without monuments. That does not make them less important. The anonymous people of prehistory carried forward the skills and biological inheritance from which later societies emerged. Their discoveries were often small: a better way to sharpen stone, a remembered water source, a warmer seam, a safer food, a stronger binding, a route across a valley. Each improvement could pass quietly from one person to another. No inventor received a statue. No date entered a textbook. Yet the knowledge remained. You walk until the lake is behind you. Night begins returning. The first stars appear. For hundreds of thousands of years, people looked upward at skies much like this one. They knew constellations you will never know. They gave names to rivers whose old names are gone. They told stories whose final listeners died long before writing. Almost all the evidence disappeared. Still, humanity continued, and perhaps the hidden age is not defined by what it failed to leave behind. Perhaps it is defined by how much could vanish while human life itself kept moving forward. You pause beneath the sky. The silence no longer feels empty. It feels crowded with lives. And now the journey begins to loosen its hold. The lake grows dim behind you, and the old landscape softens at its edges. Fires that burned thousands of generations ago become small points of amber in the distance, then fade one by one. You no longer need to follow the paths, you can simply rest. Imagine the grass cooling beneath the night sky. Imagine a little smoke drifting above a shelter, carrying the scent of wood into the dark. Somewhere, water moves gently over stones. Farther away, an animal calls once and is silent. The people you met are gone now. Their baskets have returned to earth. Their wooden tools have softened into soil. Their footprints have been covered by rain, sand, leaves, and sea. Even their names, if names were spoken around those ancient fires, have slipped beyond recovery. But they do not need to be remembered individually for their lives to have mattered. They kept children warm. They shared meals. They learned paths across difficult country. They watched changing skies. They sat beside injured companions. They shaped stone, twisted fibers, told stories, and carried knowledge forward. One quiet generation handed something to the next. And eventually, across an unimaginable distance of time, that long chain reaches the world you know tonight. So allow the ancient fires to grow smaller now. Let the valleys disappear into darkness. Let the shorelines sink beneath calm water. There is nothing more you need to uncover, nothing more you need to remember. The hidden age can return gently to silence, not an empty silence, but a warm one, filled with countless ordinary lives resting beneath forgotten stars. And as the final ember dims, you can let your own thoughts grow quieter too. The night settles, the journey ends, and the past sleeps again. Sweet dreams.